memory begins with a female voice calling Jean, and the voiceover narration shows that his sister knew how to manipulate. His older sister asks why he is not eating the cookies that their aunt so kindly shared. Angrily, she scolded him for rudeness and tried to make him feel guilty because of their aunt's feelings. Young Jean slyly turns the question back to her, asking why she doesn't eat them instead. Frozen and speechless, she crosses her arms and pouts angrily, confirming his impression of her character. Jean notices something strange. She forces him to eat disgusting food that she herself does not even touch. Other memories flash before his eyes, showing how she, with a twisted sense of justice, manipulated others. Returning to the present, his deepest desire is to live completely without his sister's influence. In the car, Jean impatiently asks if they have arrived yet, and his sister sighs loudly in irritation. Clenching the steering wheel, she growls at him, demanding a little patience and for him to stop asking. An instant thought reveals his dissatisfaction. Since she got her license, she has been bossing him around all the time. Their car finally pulls into the parking lot for the evening fireworks. When they parked and the trunk creaked, his sister stretched and complained about what a tiring trip it had been. She instantly called Jin, her eyes flashing over the bento boxes and drinks behind. With a sweet but demanding smile, she asks which bag the sake is in, completely ignoring his irritated look. After he sarcastically advises her to look for the heaviest one, he still points her to the right bag. His sister and her friend cheerfully shout that they are going first, waving goodbye to him. He watches them walk away, stunned by the mountain of luggage left to him. Resigned to his fate, he muttered to himself that it was probably better to manage alone. Putting the heavy backpack on his shoulders, he gathers his strength, thinking he just needs to endure a little longer. His hopes of making it to the university are shattered by a sudden, loud crash of a car accident. In a moment, he finds himself in a dense forest, looking around in confusion. His mind cannot comprehend this abrupt change. He does not believe this could be a parking lot. When he noticed that the cars were nowhere to be seen, he was struck by terror. The forest is eerily silent, and this increasingly confuses him, fueling a deep sense of anxiety. He stands alone with his gear and cannot believe it. Is this a dream or some strange camping? He pulls out his phone in search of help, but freezes when he sees there is no signal at all. Clenching the phone in his hand, he forces himself not to panic, although the panic inside only grows. Eventually, his path through the forest leads to a river, a possible way back to civilization. Kneeling on its bank, he gazes mesmerized at the beautiful river, and the rustle of water passes soothingly by. With renewed zeal and a sense of purpose, he decides to follow the river's current a little further. His long journey finally brings him out from among the trees, and ahead unfolds an endless expanse of water. Gasping from the exhausting walk, he realizes with shock that he has reached the sea. Standing alone on the deserted beach, he asks himself what is going on here. He has seen no one. A loud roar in his stomach suddenly reminded him that he urgently needs to eat. He opened the cooler bag and a wave of relief washed over him. Inside were drinks and bento. He sits down on the sand and begins to eat, a moment of much-needed rest. Looking around the shore, he notices with relief, the beach is clean and free of modern trash. He feels the night creeping in, so he decides to gather dead branches for the fire. The wide landscape encompasses the boundless sky, and a dense strip of forest his new, secluded place. He begins preparing tinder, carefully cutting thin, curled shavings from a piece of wood with a knife. With a bitter smile, he reflects on the irony. Because of his sister's tyranny, he was forced to go to the fireworks. The memory of the survival show surfaced, and he regrets postponing the planned camping trip. Kneeling with the bow drill, he started rubbing the stick with his palms to create friction. He grinds the wood with all his strength, and the tension is clearly visible on his face, twisted from effort. A wave of fatigue surged, his hand went numb and weakened from the constant repetitive motion. His hand begins to tremble uncontrollably as panic overtakes him along with the quickly fading daylight. Looking through the trees at the western sun, he knows he must hurry to start the fire. His exhausting efforts finally bore fruit. A thin wisp of smoke slowly rose from the wood. He carefully cupped the glowing ember in his palms and gently blew on it to ignite it into a flame. When the fire successfully flared up, he carefully added large logs to the stone hearth. When night falls, the surrounding forest plunges into deep, impenetrable darkness. The fire crackles cheerfully, a small but much-needed beacon of warmth and light in the darkness. Completely exhausted, he falls beside the fire and with relief rejoices that he took the jacket that warms him. He closes his eyes, trying to convince himself that for now everything is fine. Falling asleep, he clings to the desperate hope that this is all just a bad dream. The next morning, he was awakened by the cheerful chirping of birds in the trees. Lying on his back, he feels dizzy and confused, slowly coming to his senses. Rising, he looks at the dying fire and with a heavy heart realizes that it was not a dream. Suddenly, panic grips him when he sees that the fire has almost completely gone out, only a thin wisp of smoke remains. He quickly adds firewood to the embers and exhales with relief. It passed. It was very close. He sets off again, hoping to find the city, walking in the opposite direction from yesterday. Insect bites gave him no peace, constantly itching, and he remembered that later he needed to gather more firewood. As he walked, he heard a rustle and, becoming alert, reflexively ran his hand over his face. The journey led him to the very edge of a high, windy cliff rising above the sea. A terrible truth dawns on him. The land is completely surrounded by water. It is an island. Now he understood why he couldn't find the city. He felt completely lost and hopeless. His legs give way, he falls and desperately calls out if there is anyone here. His desperate cry meets deep silence, which only deepens his loneliness. He sat broken, and the rustle in the grass behind him suggested that someone was approaching. Wandering the forest aimlessly, he asked himself confused and painfully, why is this horror happening to him? He regrets that he simply agreed to go with his sister to the fireworks, which he did not want to see at all. Survival instincts kick in, but he wonders, why is his automatic thought to gather firewood? A sudden noise of the waterfall caught his attention, and he looked up with slight surprise. He gazes in awe at this incredible beauty, not believing that such a place could exist on this island. He finds a boiling whirlpool at the foot of the majestic waterfall, the true source of the river. Kneeling by the turbulent water, he convinces himself that he is very close to the riverbed. A small, hopeful smile appeared on his face. He felt lucky because of his discovery. He decides to gather branches and return home, fearing that the smoke from the fire will give him away. With bitter agreement, he saws a log, knowing that he will probably stay here for a long time. Out of breath from the effort, he returns through the forest, carrying a heavy log on his shoulders. He took on the project of a real house, driving sharpened stakes into the ground. After setting one of the posts, he stepped back and thoughtfully doubted whether his construction method was reliable. He lifts a long wooden beam into place, already planning how to reinforce the walls later. That evening, he sits in the skeleton of his new house and eats near a small fire. He lifts the last packed bento box and realizes that tomorrow he will have to find food by himself. A sudden rustle outside frightens him, and he looks outside, feeling that a beast is hiding nearby. His heart pounds in his chest, and he guesses it might be a rabbit or even a wild boar. Lying on a simple mat, he sighs with fatigue, wishing most of all for a bath. The next morning, cheerful bird chirping sounds in the neighboring trees. Wading in the river, he splashes and slides on the water, injuring fish and driving them into a trap. He involuntarily thinks, there is not a soul here and fishing is much easier. The freshly caught fish is fried over a crackling fire, supported by a split stick. He greedily bites a large piece of cooked fish, his face fully focused on the food. While eating, he notices the fresh taste of the fish and suddenly really wants salt. He thoughtfully looks at the dwindling supplies of drinks and decides to start drinking spring water. Turning onto his side before sleep, he firmly decided, tomorrow he would start building his house again. He kneels down and diligently spreads a mixture of mud and clay on the wooden walls. Wiping sweat from his forehead, he proudly surveys the large pile of leaves he gathered for the roof. Standing in the house that now has a roof, he notices it has become dark and thinks about making a window. The sky peeks through the dome of dark trees, standing like black silhouettes. In the neatly laid stone fireplace, the fire crackles warmly. Jin thoughtfully considered digging a trench and stacking stones to protect against the rain. He ran his palm over the rough stone and suddenly realized it could be heated to keep warm at night. Covered in mud, he thoughtfully contemplates the next task to build himself a real bath. He surveys his finished stone-lined pool and decides that although small, it is enough. A large smooth stone hisses as he lifts it from the roaring fire. With a splash, he throws the heated stone into the water, which immediately hisses and crackles. Heated stones quietly settle at the bottom of the bath, giving their heat to the water. Immersed in the heat, he fears that the stones below might crack from the heat. He sighed deeply with pure pleasure and relaxed in the hot water. Carefree floating, he is tired of simple food and craves a hearty stew. Bathing, he notices how with the arrival of autumn, the mountain leaves begin to redden. He shivers as he feels the air around the bath becoming colder. A rural clay pot full of stew is boiling vigorously over an open fire. Tasting the dish, he gratefully realizes how knowledge has taught him to cook better. His finished hut nestled among the trees like a beacon in the darkness. A proud smile blossomed on his face as he declared his construction successful. Soon snow already lay on the distant mountain, a sign that winter is coming. The icy wind bites as he trudges heavily through the snowy forest, searching for supplies. On the tree trunk, he notices a cluster of large mushrooms dusted with snow. He squints, wondering if they can be eaten, but cautiously leaves them and moves on. His small hut with a thatched roof stands against the dark silhouette of the forest. Returning to the hut, he flung down a bundle of gathered firewood onto the floor. He sits cross-legged, hunched over a small crackling fire to warm himself. Blowing on his palms, he felt the cold and realized that there would be no snow here anytime soon. Staring into the tongues of fire, he worries about fishing and plans to prepare dried supplies. A deep terror slowly creeps up and he asks himself, how much longer can I hold on? A sharp gust of wind breaks through a crack and pierces him to the bone. He stared blankly at the dying embers of the fire, and a quiet sound escaped him. The approaching darkness seems to slowly close the circle around him. His face is full of despair. He thinks, will I die here? He curled up into a ball, crushed by the overwhelming weight of complete loneliness. In his darkest moment, a bright ball of light streaked across the night sky and suddenly startled the young man. The world spins around him, while a panicked voice repeatedly apologizes for dragging him into this. A bodiless voice explains that he accidentally got involved in the hero's summons. Inside his rough hut, the voice shouts that this is not the world he knows. Confused by the unexpected guest, the young man could only stammeringly whisper, "Ha." The shining ball repeats its message again. He ended up in another world because of the hero's summons. Suddenly he demands to be returned, but the light apologizes and says it cannot do that. The light brings a terrible condition. One can enter this new world only at the brink of death. Irritated, he points out the contradiction in its words, and frankly admits that he is completely confused. His face hardened with rage, he demands to know where, damn it, this place is. Suddenly a vision appears, revealing a fantastic world of magic and swords with knights, mages, and dragons. He is still a skeptic and asks distrustfully, how can someone believe in this if they have never seen a single fantastic stamp? Smoothly hovering, the light makes it clear that it was once a god, but now its power has significantly diminished. Cheerfully adds that although no one knows now whether it even exists, its power will return someday. The former god explains, the true purpose of the summoning is only to momentarily connect two worlds. Under a hail of tangled cosmic voices, the young man clutches his head. He understands absolutely nothing. The sphere explains that only 3 people can be summoned, those who stand on the threshold of death. Suddenly shocked, the sphere admitted that it did not notice he was from the Haruka's group. He pieces together the puzzle in his head and asks, isn't his sister Haruka a heroine, and was he supposed to die? He recalls a voice that said he still had life left in his native world. Suddenly he finds himself face to face with 3 beautiful women, as if from another world, and freezes in surprise. The group is larger, a true pantheon of deities. Here is a gray-haired elder and a young boy. Dark-haired one sharply reproaches him, you reacted too slowly. She decisively decides, first we will listen to his wishes and we will deal with the accident later. While he hesitated, a small fluffy creature resembling a wolf appeared at their feet with a soft sound. Rish, a wolf-like creature, confesses with a heavy tone in his voice. The accident is his fault because the call failed. The young man burns with indignation and insists that it is not his fault, and the old woman asks whom he will choose. Van silenced the little god with a sharp look and ordered him to wait. Fixing her gaze on him, she offers him the choice of a guardian deity. Van introduces himself and offers him any gift he desires in exchange for the rest of his life. The majestic woman calls herself Rudiel, the goddess of earth and the magic of tranquility. The old man with a long white beard introduced himself. I am Kato, the lord of plants and order. A serious blonde boy confidently says that he is Ish, who watches over water and healing. The old woman in a dark hood introduces herself. I am Pal, the goddess of earth and harvest. A cheerful girl with wavy hair winks, revealing that she is Mistu, who controls light, wind, romance, and whimsy. Stunningly beautiful Kal Alpha declares its dominion over light, love, and beauty. A gentle hand strokes a sleeping wolf-like creature named Rish, the god of ice and darkness whose power has faded. Jin irritably thought that Rish used to be so confident, although his power is now fading. A little embarrassed, he asks, can the divine powers of gods overlap each other? Mistu and Van explain that even the weakened power of Rish is still so mighty that it can be considered the power of a god. With a hand on Jin's chin, he is asked to choose which of the gods he prefers. Standing before the gathered gods, he asks if he should choose them all. The wise god Kato says, Jin's life is too short to gain all their powers without weakening his defense. The gods explain that they rarely gather like this, so trying to choose all is a futile endeavor. Kato adds, the power you receive will manifest as the god who grants it. Mistu offers a confusing analogy about emotions, contrasting love, friendship, and obsession. Completely baffled by her logic, Jin is forced to admit to himself that he cannot follow her reasoning. Kato eases the choice and says to Jin, think about what you want to do in your new life. The young man thoughtfully repeats this question to himself, pondering what he really wants to do. He says he wants to live comfortably freely, without any restrictions or desires. With a serious expression, he adds the main condition, no relationships with his older sister. He asks for the power that will allow him to freely explore this new world, completely separate from her. The floating wolf Rish enthusiastically praises Haruki's justice, but Jin coldly replies that she only uses it as a tool. Cattle asks if Jin felt that flow of power when Haruka received her abilities. After all, it strengthens the gods. Confused and angry, Jin demands to know what terrible powers his sister received. A chill runs down his spine when he learns that she gained dominion, and all magic, his determination only grows stronger. Close up, a hand prepares to give him a gift or endow him with power. The hand makes a forward gesture, and a voice solemnly announces the powers about to be given. Kato lists a whole range of abilities: freedom, division, and the shocking murder of the hero. Jin agrees outwardly, but inwardly doubts that skill in killing heroes after all. He clearly asked not to interfere. Another close-up of a hand as if a signal. The gods are extending a tangible gift. Kato raises the sword, an indispensable tool for survival, which he calls the killer blade and which can cut almost anything. Goddess Van steps forward, holding a pouch, and explains that the pouch will be needed where he is going. In the pouch is powder for plant growth. Jin accepts it and sincerely thanks her. Kato sincerely thanks Jin for his effortless calm, and a quiet bark is barely audible in the air. A small wolf-like creature stretches and trembles slightly while the final preparations are made. He asks can he take the puppy with him. The young man thinks that Rish, without power, can only give himself. He gently asks the small wolf-like creature to accompany him on the journey. In response, Rish confirms the new agreement with a quiet, satisfied bark. Van the goddess gives him the last gift, transportation to a safe refuge. Arriving at the luxurious estate, he vowed to live peacefully and comfortably. Looking at the new surroundings, he froze with admiration at what he saw. Before his eyes unfolds a captivating, endless landscape, rolling hills and a village in the distance. He froze, admiring the beautiful views and the unexpectedly warm weather. Walking to his new home, he thinks that it is more of an estate. His reflection in the mirror showed a shocking, unfamiliar face. He asks himself what happened to his appearance, why it suddenly changed so unexpectedly. Confused, he feels like the son of God and sincerely thanks them. The entrance door creaks open and he steps into his new home. In the spacious hallway, he quietly utters a sound of admiration. In the cozy arranged living room, right in front of the warm fireplace, there is a soft plush armchair. The tour leads him further into the kitchen with a brick stove and dishes. Standing in another large room, he noticed with admiration how spacious this house was. He continues to explore this impressive dwelling. He discovers a huge pantry, a food supply that will never run out. Surrounded by endless supplies, he feels as if he is living in a dream. He could not believe his eyes. In front of him was a huge vat with live salmons and, sorry. He wonders if the water in this bath is somehow connected to his old home Japan. The sight of fresh fish ignites hunger in him after the monotonous food on the island. Noticing dirty hands, he wisely decided to wash before eating. He sighs deeply with satisfaction and immerses himself in the hot water. Diving into the water, he reflects on the pure, simple happiness of a genuine good bath. A practical idea struck him like lightning: how to polish rice with his new skills. Finally dressed, he stands before the wooden rice polishing machine, ready to try. He squints his eyes and activates his skill of evaluation to understand this. The skill instantly reveals the mechanism of the machine, impressing him with its incredible clarity. Soon the rice begins to boil and rise in clouds of steam in the traditional wooden vessel. Next to him, his little friend Rich sleeps sweetly in a woven basket. He firmly decides to strengthen the forces and protection he received from Rich. Sitting by the basket, he sincerely promised Rich meat as soon as he recovers. In the kitchen, he begins rhythmically shredding cabbage into thin strips. He generously grinds spices from the mill directly onto a thick piece of sirloin steak. The seasoned steak sizzles loudly as soon as it touches the hot, oil-greased pan. He thoughtfully wrinkles his brow. The combination is strange, but he still decides to cook it. A strong, almost aggressive smell of fish and crabs fills the kitchen. He opens the container before him, appears a portion of warm, fluffy white rice. The prepared dish was served so beautifully that it seemed to sparkle with flavor. He clasped his palms together, whispering a quiet thank you for the food. Taking a knife and fork, he easily cuts the tender, perfectly cooked steak. He brings the first juicy piece of steak to his mouth and savors it. Pure joy shone on his face, and he exclaimed that it was incredibly delicious. He was moved by the simple, deep flavors of the well-seasoned dish. Later, lying in bed, he realizes there is no need to worry about the fire anymore. A wave of relief washed over him. Finally, he is safe from the beasts. Looking at his majestic estate, he accepts from now on he will live here. Cozy under a fluffy blanket, he feels that even on a soft bed he cannot fall asleep. A new chapter begins. He loudly introduces himself, Kanahana-jin. After a few weeks, he wakes up groaning, having done almost nothing, just eating and sleeping. After washing, he felt as if he had found meaning and determination again. Variants of recipes from what lay in his pantry quickly flashed through his mind. He was going to cook ramen, but he was eager to try the unique cuisines of this world. He notices dried bonito flakes and seaweed and observes that they are raw. In the pantry, he suddenly realizes there is no wheat to grind into flour. On the wooden table stands a simple dish: fried fish with rice. He eats with pleasure, grateful that he can still prepare a decent meal. Remembering the map and money, he decided to try going shopping. Unfolding the map, he anxiously considers where to go on his first journey. His hand moves over the expansive map, as if outlining kingdoms and continents. He suddenly recalled the recommended place and quickly found it on the map. With a surge of energy, he activates the transition skill and teleports. In front of him stands a settlement surrounded by walls. He recognizes it, the border town of Kanem. He thought that this is the perfect place to earn gold by killing monsters. Near the city gate, a guard stopped him, looked sternly, and demanded to show documents and pay a toll. He feels awkward. He senses that he stands out among the crowd. Wondering whether it is because of his clothes or the way he looks, he decides to buy local clothing. Now in a hooded cloak, he decides to go shopping and blend unnoticed with the crowd. In the shop, he ran his hand over a roll of fabric and immediately felt its coarse texture. He holds a heavy pouch of money and carefully examines various goods. He holds a coin, and in his thoughts, a cute cartoon image of Rish involuntarily appears. He suspects that there is a considerable sum there, the same as his sisters have. Russell drew his attention to a luxurious bottle on the top shelf. He immediately recognizes that expensive potion, which usually appears in fantasy games. He decides that he can probably make the same one himself after all. He has the skill to evaluate. His thoughts return to food. He wants to try the local cuisine. His skill to evaluate reveals dangerous bacteria, so he decides not to take the risk. Simple scales caught his attention and drew him to another shop. The scales and the grape trellis nearby immediately interested him. He admiringly gazes at the exquisite trellis and suddenly realizes that he still needs tools for the household. He asks the shopkeeper to sell him a pitchfork. He asks for a strange thing, a twig from the trellis outside. A young girl offers to recommend a good weapons store. The shopkeeper immediately guesses that he is a novice adventurer and offers advice. He imagines how terrible the heat must be in metal armor during summer. He gratefully thanks the kind saleswoman for her useful advice. In the weapon shop, he feels as if he suddenly found himself in a game. He firmly holds a simple but reliable long sword, testing its weight and how it fits in his hand. He puts a new knife into the sheath and, despite uncertainty, decides what to take with him. Now with everything he needs, he smiles, recalling his tiring but fruitful shopping trip. He sees an inn nearby, but knows he won't be able to use his teleportation skill. He decides to return home because he is very worried about his companion Rich. Under the starry sky, he plans to return tomorrow to visit the guild. The next day he finds himself in front of a large guild hall with a wooden frame. In the noisy guild, he approaches the counter to register. The receptionist offers him a choice, and he immediately decides to pay the fee without hesitation. While they make his tag, he suddenly remembers he has one more question. They lead him to the library and he reaches for a book, ready to immerse himself in study. At the guild, Jin immersed himself in a book about forest animals possessed by demons. The guide vividly depicts the forest map, reveals the monster's weak spots, and lists useful items. While he was absorbed in reading, suddenly a voice sounded from behind. A smiling adventurer approaches and asks if he is the one who requested an escort. Jin confirms this and honestly admits he is not confident in his own strength. The traveler Din introduced himself as a 2-star silver and added that he is forced to serve. Hearing about Din's high rank, the stunned Jin began to say his own name. Embarrassed, calling himself Jean, he hurriedly finishes the introduction and asks, "Please take care of me." Din smiles slyly. Their names are so similar, and Jean is panicking over his accidental slip. Their conversation is suddenly interrupted by an angry shout from a girl, Din. The girl with blonde pigtails rushes forward, demanding that Din not choose companions carelessly. Irritated by her outburst, Din sharply told her to be quiet and stop bossing him around. Jin silently watches as the quarrel flares up, and he is annoyed by all these internal guild games. Din hurriedly apologized to Jin and promised to settle that troublesome matter. The girl Amal insists that another adventurer named Chris will take on the nobleman's request. Jin glanced at the dish, whose attention is now fixed on his inquisitive gaze. Din firmly says that he will never become someone's personal liaison for the nobility. Crossing his arms, he says that he is trying to correct a mistake from the past. Amal vents her irritation at Jean, accusing him of seeking her intervention. Another young woman intervenes and sharply tells Emil, "Stop relying on my brother." The dish froze at the sudden arrival of Miss Kana, who interrupted it. Dean thanks Kana and she immediately replies, "It's your fault you spoiled Emil." The guild receptionist sighs heavily and apologizes to Jean for the inappropriate display. The dark, textured background, a sign of the beginning of Jean's inner thoughts. He realizes that the dynamic between brother and sister again evokes in him a familiar, instinctive feeling of rejection. Calmly tells the stunned Dean that he is withdrawing his request for accompaniment. Emil's face lit up with a bright smile. She sincerely and warmly thanks him. She smiles and suggests he find another party as he passes by, not worrying at all. At the counter, Jean officially tells the receptionist that he no longer needs accompaniment. Dean calls him, trying to object to the sudden decision. The receptionist apologizes once again and assures him that all his money will be refunded. Jean says it's okay, but hopefully asks if he can instead take a traveler's guide. The shot shows the large Adventurers Guild building outside with a wooden frame. Standing on the city street, Jean sighed deeply and disappointedly. He closes his eyes and vows never to endure such a suffocating connection again. Suddenly, a tiny fairy-like girl appears and asks if he is going to use his splitting skill. He instantly silenced Mistu, quietly reminding her that only he can see her now. Mistu advises him he can communicate with her through his consciousness. She says he really hears her thoughts, but only if he consciously directs them to her. Miss Hito jokingly hints that he can be allowed mischievous thoughts, but he firmly denies it himself. He decides to use his ability to disconnect in order to sever all ties with his sister. Miss Hito warns, if the target of the ability is expanded, its effectiveness will weaken. Jean looks worried and doubts that the power of abilities can weaken. She joyfully floats through the streets of the town and simply explains the limitations of her abilities. He looks at her and sincerely thanks her for the useful information. She smiles brightly, surrounded by flower petals, and gratefully responds to him. Mistu disappears in a white whirl of light, leaving Jean to continue alone. Jen asks herself, did she appear to advise or just out of curiosity about him? Without accompaniment, he decides to go alone into the demon forest. The textured panel reveals before his eyes a cobblestone path stretching beyond the city limits. The guard at the city gates nods to him and grants permission to proceed. Behind the huge city walls, Jin clutches the adventurer's guidebook he obtained. Peeking into the manual, he reads that horned rabbits appear near the forest entrance. He recalled a record in the library insisting that monster horns are extremely important. The handbook explains that weak monsters are called hornless because they have very tiny horns. Looking at the drawings of the rabbits, he feels complete confidence he can defeat them. He is alone, so he decides to take the risk and test his special ability. With a dramatic whistle, he summons his powerful, luxuriously decorated sword that destroys everything. Standing in the tall grass, he tensely prepares for his first solo hunt. A sudden lunge and a small, completely ordinary white rabbit appeared nearby. He relaxes, deciding that it is just an ordinary animal, and suddenly the rustling is heard again. A monstrous rabbit slides down the slope and suddenly jumps into the air. A creature with a tiny horn and blackened eyes rushes towards him. Despite its terrifying appearance, he recognizes this creature a hornless rabbit. In the whirl of movement, he swiftly swings his sword and hits the rabbit rushing at him. He is momentarily stunned. The fight ended so quickly and decisively. Looking at the dead rabbit below, he realized he defeated it with one blow. He throws the carcass into the bag and worries whether his store-bought sword will hold up. A powerful sound of a cut rolled through the panel, signaling another attack. He directs his gaze at the new target and is already ready to rush into battle again. He effortlessly defeats the horned rabbit with an ordinary sword and is surprised himself. Carrying his body, he continues his path through the forest, bathed in sunlit patches. On the textured panel, a lush, calm forest unfolds around him. Thanks to his ability to assess, he notices that the beautiful patch of grass is a true medicinal plant. He comes across wild berries and excitedly notices how generous and pleasant this forest is. The chibi version of him joyfully delights in his new useful skills. He uses the storage skill, and the herbs instantly disappear into a magical vortex. Seeing a pile of mushrooms, he immediately recognizes them the same as on the island where he once was. The assessment confirms that they are edible, and he regrets not knowing this earlier. Suddenly he shudders, a drop of sweat glistens on his face. He feels danger. He senses the presence of a monster, a creature much larger than a rabbit. He sharply turns around, his face frightened, trying to find the approaching threat. A little ahead of him, a low growl burst from a large horned silhouette. A huge horned bear rose on its hind legs and let out a terrifying roar from its chest. A mask of shock froze on his face when he recognized that mighty monster. The scene changes. Tall trees in the forest grow against the backdrop of a bright sky. Jin looks thoughtful, as if after a tense and dangerous clash. The bear now lies dead when suddenly Mistu appears and scares him with a sharp datta. He reproaches Mistu for appearing so suddenly. She apologizes jokingly. He admits that he completely forgot that he can use magic. She hints that he doesn't need to wander in search of another monster. Mistu cheerfully advises him instead to try using his tracking skill. Jin suddenly realized that he was given so many abilities that he had almost ignored. He decides to activate the exploration skill. His attention sharpens, and every detail suddenly appears clearer. Suddenly, a sight appears in his field of vision. He locks onto a horned rabbit. He blushed, realizing that his hunt could have been much simpler from the very beginning. Miss To begins to teach him the basics of using magic. She loudly enumerates all those magical gifts with which God's blessings have endowed him. The horned rabbit rushes straight at him, becoming a perfect target. Closing his eyes, Jin concentrates his thoughts, preparing to imagine his spell. With a determined cry, the young man releases a powerful spell, Wind Slash. The magical attack successfully struck the small horned rabbit. It lies lifeless. He held his breath, looking at his hand. He cannot believe that magic really appeared. He turned to the girl hovering in the air, Miss Hito, and sincerely thanked her. As she slowly disappears, Miss Hito quietly tells him that other spirits will give him their power. Then he summons a small cyclone with his wind magic. He sweeps everything around. Now hiding his loot, he decides to sell it in the guild. Squatting next to the giant bear, he racks his brains on how to deliver it to the guild. At the entrance to the trade guild, he politely asks for his belongings to be inspected and appraised. A guild worker with sticking-up hair watches intently and listens carefully to the young man's request. With a dramatic gesture, he shows an impossibly large sack, stunning the guild worker. The worker asks in surprise how he carried it and notes that it looks rough. He justifies the sack to himself, better this way than exposing the monster's wounds. His gaze falls on the dismembered monster carcasses hanging from the ceiling. Like a wave, his time on the island surfaces in his memory how he processed fish and cared for animals. He realizes that his strength of spirit now makes this horror bearable. The worker gestured to the young man where to place that gigantic package. After examining the hide, the worker exclaimed with admiration what a fine bear skin. The man notes that it would sell for more in the Adventurers Guild. To himself, he decides to stay away from those troublesome brothers and sisters from the other guild. Then he asks how to learn to make potions, and the worker asks for some time. The man says that trade guilds are those who spread common knowledge. He said that it works out and asked for everything to be properly evaluated. In a moment, he triumphantly raises the newly acquired scroll with potion recipes. Flipping through the scroll, he realizes with surprise how rich and diverse its contents are. He understood brewing potions seems to be not difficult at all. He plans to hide his innate magical ability to heal using potions. It was at that moment when he was lost in thought that the guild worker called out to him. The man suddenly says that he found a magic stone and offers to show it. Surprised, he recalls reading about such things in the guidebook. Magic stones are extremely rare. They are precious gems born from the spiritual remains of a monster. The worker explains the properties of the stone that make it ideal for fire magic. He agrees to the exchange, saying that he does not need it for magic. His business in the wooden-framed guild building is now finished. Having finished his business, he decides to take a walk around the city and eat. He walks along the narrow stone streets of the city. The journey leads him to a noisy market teeming with people. The colorful, lively atmosphere of the market fills him with admiration. His eyes enchantedly slid from huge wheels of cheese to dried meat. The stalls are bursting with various goods, among them hang bunches of sausages and salami. He sees huge bowls of noodles and long stuffed rolls displayed for sale. He notices that the local bread is mostly simple slices for sandwiches. Using his skill to evaluate, he carefully looks at the sausages sizzling on the grill. Confident that well-fried means safe, he politely orders one sausage. He takes a big juicy bite of the freshly prepared sausage. He feels that it is fatty and concludes, for the local adventurers the main thing is calories. Then his attention is drawn to a stall with all kinds of dried fruits. He tries some dried fruits and thoughtfully chews them while walking. One of the preserved fruits turned out to be incredibly sour and simply shocked him. Recovering, he immediately thinks about what delicious dish can be made from this fruit. Then his eyes stop on the vendor who seems to be selling brown sugar. He is fascinated by the old-fashioned scales used to weigh lumps of sugar. The aroma of fermentation draws him to the brewery, and he suddenly wonders, from what age is it allowed to drink here? The simple pleasure of wandering the market brings him a feeling of joy. He continues to walk through the lively, crowded market street. The murmur of the chattering crowd ahead ignites his curiosity. He sticks his head around the corner of the house and peeks to see what has gathered them here. He looks with fascination at a whole pig roasting over the fire. The sight of a whole roasted pig mesmerizes him. The seller smiles and explains that the appetizing pork is for making sandwiches. Without hesitation, he approaches the counter and orders one for himself. The seller hands him a thick sandwich that looks incredibly appetizing. After biting off a huge piece, he immediately understood. The taste is simply amazing. He savors it and decides, the pork is juicy but the bread is disappointing. He firmly decided to buy a whole roasted pig for the pantry later. Night falls, he returns to his magnificent house by the mountains. He gently whispers that he has returned to his sleeping friend who looks like a fox, Rish. He sits down and thinks that his time on the island has shrunk his stomach. Sitting next to the basket, he watches as his hand emits a quiet squeak. His hand begins to glow with a warm, gentle light as he prepares to heal. He knows that Rish's very existence is slowly fading, a condition that even healing magic cannot fix. Despite this, he sincerely wishes for his companion to recover as soon as possible. He looks at the starry sky and gently whispers to the quiet home, "Good night." Morning light seeps through the trees, gently announcing the start of a new day. He sits down for a modest breakfast: fried fish, rice, and soup. While eating, the image of that poor-quality fabric he saw in Kanemi surfaces again in his mind. The ability to understand the language ignites in him a desire to read local books. Today he decides to set out for the huge, multi-tiered royal capital. At the city gates, he asks the guard for a map or a guide. The guard hands him a simple map guide to help him navigate the city. The guard warns the merchant guild tour may turn out to be a complete scam. Better, though riskier, to hire one of the local guys. He sincerely thanks the guard for the advice and hands him money for the help. The guard then recommends a specific guide, a guy named Leon. He sincerely thanks for the useful advice. He enters the city, glad that he chose the neighboring country just in case. Walking the streets, he cannot help but notice the small houses seem to have grown together. His path leads to the main city square, above which towers a huge building. The guard's words again stuck in his memory, look for Leon near the well. Noticing a figure near the well, he cautiously approached and asked if it was Leon. He immediately froze from the furious reaction that burst upon him. Leon turns and looks at him with a sharp, hostile gaze. With obvious hostility, Leon demands to know what his business is. After the aggressive greeting, the air sparkles with unspoken tension. Inside, he is gripped by horror at how frightening Leon's facial expression looked. Only the mention of the guard made Leon's gaze even more threatening. Fearing he was tricked, he nervously says, "Maybe I was wrong." Suddenly, Leon's gaze softened and he agreed to become his guide. Recovering, he asks his new guide to recommend which places are definitely worth seeing. Leon suggests taking a look at the view from the fortress, but immediately warns entry there is forbidden. Leon, with a stone-faced expression, said, "Civilians are prohibited from entering here." Jin is restless inside, not knowing how to respond to this useless advice. Suddenly, he changes the subject and asks for advice, where to find clothing stores or eateries. Leon's face darkens and becomes threatening. He urges them to eat quickly because he knows the shop. Jin is confused and silently asks himself why his guide always has such a frightening expression on his face. Their boots echo on the cobblestones as they walk through the city streets. While talking, Jin turns his head and asks the guide another question. Leon explains that the city taxes houses based on how wide they face the road. Jin asked why the houses stand so closely pressed against each other. In his guidebook, he talks about other taxes, even those charged for transit and for glass. Surprised by the glass nails, Jin realizes windows here are a true luxury. He remembered that in Kanemi there were no glass windows and finally understood why. Then his attention was drawn to a large, luxuriously decorated building they saw in the square. Leon recognizes it as the Spirits Arch, a beautiful place with a fountain. Jin thoughtfully concludes, these people probably have a strong belief in spirits. Leon turned away with a contemptuous snort and abruptly stopped explaining. He apologizes and admits he really should have shown such Jin places. The genie calms him down, mentally deciding that Leon is after all not so bad. Leon mumbles to himself that he is completely unfit to lead tour. An elderly, impeccably dressed gentleman enters the door, the one Leon calls not. The man's face lit up with relief when he shouted to the young Mississippi. Jean is completely confused and looks around, searching for the one the man is addressing. His head is wildly filled with questions about the butler's clothes and that strange title. Leon clarifies that Not has been the butler of their family since the times when he was a child. He sharply demands an explanation why the butler is here, despite Jean's embarrassment. Leon looks away, his face serious. He is waiting for the butler's answer. The butler's face froze into a grim mask when he uttered a terrifying, urgent message. Suddenly, a woman in military uniform appeared and sharply ordered them to leave the city. Jean suddenly realizes this is a completely different person, although she is called Lilith. Lilith gestured towards the covered cart and ordered them to get inside immediately. Leon stands his ground, his face a mask of defiance, seeing no reason to flee. The butler tries to pass off the escape as a tactical retreat, but he fails. Losing patience, Lilith sharply grabs Leon's hand to force him to move. Leon sharply pushed her hand away with one quick reflexive movement. The butler rushes to them, noticing that the young lady is injured. Lilith firmly demands to know why they did not use a potion for this injury. The butler explains, their exile means they cannot afford treatments previously covered by the family treasury. Watching the chaotic scene unfold, Jean is completely confused and does not understand what is happening. Lilith hears a hum from the city and insists, let's go before a commotion arises. Jean hesitates for a moment by the waiting cart and decides to intervene. He steps forward and extends the potion he brewed himself to help the wounded man. Jean explains that this is a trial sample which he tested with his skill of evaluation. Lilith, stunned by the stranger's unexpected offer, asks with a trembling voice, "Who are you?" He calls himself Jean and explains that Leon was his guide. The butler confirms Jean's story and adds that they were heading to the Thames store. Lilith briefly considers Jean's offer, her finger touching her chin. Jean gestures for them to sit in the waiting carriage, offering to give them a ride. In the rattling cart, the butler gently cares for the wounded Leon. Leon sharply uncorked the elixir given to him and drank it in one big gulp. Jean looks anxiously, hoping that the untested potion he gave will work as needed. When Leon finally recovered, Lilith and the butler sincerely thanked Jean. Jean, overwhelmed, silently dreams of just breaking away and leaving. Leon's eyes opened, a look of confusion frozen on his face after what he had experienced. They ask bewilderedly where they are, and the butler gently replies that they are inside the carriage. Leon remembers being kicked out, but insists that he is not guilty of anything and does not deserve such treatment. Lilith firmly says that she knows. Leon has always been a man of honor, and she reveals the truth. She explains that Leon's younger brother is unsettled by the fact that they are alive. Jean Lichtensand realizes that he has been drawn into yet another complicated family quarrel. Leon sarcastically doubts whether it is worth conducting a tour during a family quarrel. The carriage stopped with a rumble and the butler shouted, "Mr. Alderguide." In the shop, Leon addresses the shop owner time with a request, help Jean with clothing. Leon apologizes for the unfinished tour, but Jean insists no is not the time. Ready to depart, Jean tells Time that he leaves this matter in his hands. Lilith stops Jean and politely formally introduces herself. She is from the House of Deviland. She extends a ring to him and says, "Look for me if you find yourself in trouble." Jean accepts the ring for now, and a slight anxiety can be read in his eyes. Curiosity gets the better of him, and he asks about the young Mississippi. Lilith reveals a stunning truth. Leon is actually a girl, her name is Lyra Alderhide. Jean is overwhelmed to the point of madness, his mind swirling from the sudden, sharp revelation. Lilith explains that Lyra's brutal, androgynous appearance often misleads people as they confuse her gender. Throwing one last penetrating glance, Lilith apologizes and leaves. The butler, with a subdued voice, apologizes for the trouble caused, offers money and begs for silence. Jean looks around the shop and notices with confusion that there is no clothing here at all. Before he can react, he is surrounded by enthusiastic salespeople. He is struck by an unexpected shock. He realizes he has found himself in a tailor's atelier where clothes are made to order. Soon Jean leaves the shop, looking completely exhausted after the fitting. He finds a secluded place to use his magic, carrying his new purchases. With a flash of energy, he activates his ability to store and instantly hides the package in storage. Having bought sheets and blankets, he is already about to go to the bookstore. He returns home and enjoys a simple dinner under the starry night sky. He settles down with the purchased book, ready for a calm, cozy evening. He announces his return to the large, majestic house he now calls home. His hand gently glows as he checks on his sleeping feline companion Rish. He stands by the bed, ready to settle in and read his new books. He reads by the light of a single candle, its flame gently flickering. As the room sinks into darkness, it becomes harder for him to read by the candlelight flicker. He considers making a lamp, pondering whether to use rapeseed oil as fuel. Suddenly a memory flashes in his mind. The goddess taught him magic. By the prompt of memory, he raises his finger and focuses on the word light. A small bright ball of light suddenly appears right before him and shines dazzlingly. He is delighted with his success and exclaims how convenient this magic is. He replays in his mind the whole chaos of this day and feels that he has gained a lot from it. His thoughts again fly to Lyra, that young lady with a frightened face whom he met. He does not know what happened to Leora and her companions after they parted ways. Despite the uncertainty, he stands by the window and sincerely prays for her safety. He gazes into the quiet night, his face thoughtful and worried. Below in the basket, his little companion awakens from sleep. The creature's eyes blinked. It woke from a long sleep, making a quiet sound. A new chapter begins. Jean calls his companion among the mountains. While Jean holds the basket of fruits, Reese playfully rustles in the grass nearby. A young man in a dark cloak told his fluffy, dog-like companion that it was time for them to return. The story opens revealing that several months have passed since the little creature finally woke up. At first, Rich could barely step, but later recovered and now looks much better. Carrying a basket, the young man walks through the quiet forest, and Rish happily jumps alongside. In a room full of jars with preserves, he quietly confirms his agreement to the plan. He thoughtfully holds a jar in his hands and recalls recent affairs, how he mastered new skills such as carpentry. His thoughts return again to the scent of medicinal herbs. He is worried, and already plans expansion before winter comes. Outside, he stands near a small plant, his face pensive. He weighs his next step. Suddenly, a memory surfaces of how he bought a cork oak seedling, and now he hesitates, to plant or not. The seedling is already in the ground. He kneels beside it, ready to begin. He decides to sprinkle the newly planted sapling with a special magical growth powder. The sparkling powder sprinkles the little plant, and at that very moment, its magical transformation begins. The branches of the plants begin to crackle and grow wildly at an astonishing speed. He watches with fascination as the sprout rapidly expands, and involuntarily makes a sound of amazement. The sprout has turned into a giant, ancient tree, and he looks at it, full of admiration. He remembers how he sprinkled the same powder on his grape trellis, and marveled at its incredible power. Seeing a generous source of raw materials in the tree, he plans a trip to the town of Canaan. The scene jumps to the noisy, lively medieval streets of the town of Canaan. Every time he brings goods, renting a room is a real hassle. Walking through the town, he notices a lost handkerchief on the cobblestones. He recognizes the pink-haired girl who dropped it and sighs with irritation upon seeing her again. A thought flashes through his mind. The girl has been following him since he sold the bear at the trade guild. He deliberately pretends not to notice her and turns his back on the confused girl. A wave of anxiety passes through him. Buying household items while supposedly staying at a hotel would look strange. With a determined look, he concluded that the best solution to his problem was to rent a house. Later, the realtor shows him a house with a simple stone and wooden facade. The agent enthusiastically describes the house as a new, inexpensive, and safe option. Inspecting the doorframe, he notices a sloppy fit and concludes, old, improved houses are better. Despite the flaws, he chooses this house and decides to learn more first before starting repairs. The montage shows him eagerly mastering new skills, helping to make cheese. He is also seen carefully applying plaster to a stone wall, learning the craft by hand. Having decided, he sighs heavily and notices that the girl with pink hair is still spying on him. The season has changed. Distant sharp mountain peaks are now crowned with snow. He feels the air has become colder, and at that very moment, he hears the girl's panicked voice nearby. The pink-haired girl loudly worries, pretending she lacks money. He turns to her and she freezes in surprise seeing him standing there. She called out, trying to get his attention just as he began to walk away from her. She asks if he is going to the demon forest and warns him, in the cold, danger only increases. He calmly says that he has already taken the risks of this journey into account. She begged him not to overexert himself, insisting that his life is more important than money. He tries to calm the worried girl, assuring her that he is not taking on too much. She reaches out to stop him, deliberately stumbles and falls to the ground. On the ground, she says she tripped, but playfully and slyly winks. Her eyes sparkle as she looks at him with hope and a pleading expression. He looks down on her, unimpressed, and wonders why she does not back down despite his constant refusals. Suddenly, his gaze breaks away from her and rushes toward the city gates nearby. A burly man appears from the gates, and the young man recoils in surprise. He recognizes the man as the girl's older brother and greets him politely, though tiredly. Brother Din recognizes him from a previous tense meeting at the guild. Din instantly and sincerely begs forgiveness, folding his hands together in a gesture of genuine repentance. Jean asks in surprise why there is a woman named Kana here, and Din says that the bosses are scolding her right now. Din says sadly that the guild is furious. The trade guild has poached a wonderful adventurer from them because of that quarrel. Jean quietly and submissively apologizes, acknowledging his share in what happened. The younger brother intervenes in the conversation and blames the sister for everything, saying it was because of her dreadful words and actions. Din looks tense while Jean prepares to state his condition, from which he will not back down. Jean firmly demands that Din's sister never approach him whenever she sees him in the city. Din reluctantly agrees to the condition, but freezes for a moment before continuing. He asks defensively if that is allowed, insisting that his sister is actually quite nice. Jean is internally shocked by the brother's amazing sister filter and his obvious complex about his sister. Din presses him, asking, what type is he if his sister is not food, isn't she? Jean says he would choose someone with a natural appearance, not at all like Din's sister. When he spoke, an image of an androgynous person with blonde hair suddenly flashed in his imagination. He quickly explains that he wants someone feminine, not someone who looks like a man, and Dean remains embarrassed. To apologize for all the trouble, Dean offers to show him a place where a rare plant grows. Jean, who was already planning to gather herbs, gladly agrees to the offer. Dean happily gave a big thumbs up, pleased with the new arrangement and the chance to make amends. Jean thinks to himself that Dean would be a perfectly normal person, if not for his obsessive complex about his sister. They step together into a lush, sunlit part of the forest where the leaves play with patches of light. Dean points to a plant with long, pointed leaves and says it is the valuable kinchak herb. Jean wonders, does this grassy, earthy smell mean it will be tasteless? Dean suggests catching a rabbit and cooking lunch from it, and Jean agrees. Suddenly, Jean realizes with horror that today he cannot use his skills of transition and storage. Soon, over the crackling fire in a small clearing, meat will begin to roast on skewers. Jin praises Dean. His combat moves were effective and truly instructive to the eyes. Dean, embarrassed by the praise, asked if Jin was really strong enough to hunt bears by himself. Jin explains that his fighting style is skill, not brute strength. Dean, puzzled by the term brute strength, looks at Jin's slender figure with a questioning gaze. Jin bitterly regrets his short stature and lack of muscles, vowing to become stronger. He shudders when Dean suddenly appears nearby with stunning speed. Dean kicks something in the underbrush. A dull thud startled Jin unexpectedly. Both men lifted their heads in surprise. A new, unexpected person appeared before them. Jin recognizes her. Lyra and asks, "What are you doing here in such a place?" Lyra decisively says they are here to hunt a bear and collect water. Jin nearly panics inwardly. He called Lyra by her real name right in front of Dean and fears for her status as a fugitive. Dean asks if they are acquainted, and both say in unison that they are. Lyra introduces herself to Dean as Ash and holds a mask. Jean quietly exhales with relief, glad he did not say her real name. Ash sincerely apologized for what happened earlier and promised to settle with Jean for the potion he gave them. Dean interrupts, stabbing a skewer with roasted rabbit meat toward Ash, and does not accept their apologies. Dean, with a friendly and insistent smile, tells Ash that for now they just need to eat. He thinks if Ash is really strong enough to hunt bears, then they should already have enough money to pay. Ash was stunned when he heard that the room costs 1 gold coin per day, and this is called expensive. Dean snorted skeptically. What kind of Ash settled here if for that money there is only a bed and a table? Ash says that the pink-haired girl at the reception introduced him, and Jean exclaims that he is being ripped off. Dean and Jean simultaneously felt a chill of fear and understood exactly whom he meant, the receptionist with pink hair. Dean instantly rushed to defend Amel's sister, insisting that the tavern was to blame and she had no bad intentions at all. Jean cut off with irony. Why does Dean lose logic every time it comes to his sister? Dean never tires of praising Emil. He says she is sweet and gives her all, so everyone should help her. Ash thoughtfully finally figures out the reason. The receptionist is Mr. Dean's younger sister. Ash's face darkens and takes on a threatening look, and Dean, confused, nervously points to his frightening expression. A young man named Ash suddenly shows next to someone's sister stands a spirit. He explains that the sign of her influence invisibly hovers over Mr. Dean's head. The embarrassed Dean, all a nervous sweat, insists that he sees absolutely nothing. Jean wonders how strange to see not the spirit but only its sign. Suddenly, a white flower miraculously grew from the top of Dean's head. Jean barely restrains laughter, his cheeks puffed up with amusement. Trembling with laughter, he looks pleadingly at the stern face, which seems not to look at him at all. Looking more closely, Jean notices that this flower is artificial. He apologizes for what he is about to do, reaching out to the strange growth. With a sharp click, he tore the flower from Dean's head and raised it up. Dean's body instantly wavered, losing all strength and balance. He collapses unconscious to the ground, and Jean calmly apologizes for his action. Ash calmly explains that it was mental control, and Dean fainted when interrupted. Jean, responding to Ash, decisively says, if he focuses, he can touch spirits. He usually sees only his companion and keeps her out of reach, so it doesn't affect him. Ash is stunned. It turns out Jean is the first person with such an ability he has ever met. He clarifies in his family only his father sees spirits, but he cannot touch them. Jean accepted this warning and promised to be careful with his unique power. Ash was afraid that his comrade would find out about his ability. Both realized they are strangers who met only today. Ash lost his composure. He understood the strange connection between himself and this new acquaintance. They are stunned. Their slightly gloomy and joking thoughts about the bear turned out to be exactly the same. Sighing, Ash resigns himself to his mistake in judgment and to this strange situation. Jean notices that Ash seems doomed to always get the worst. They sit next to the campfire and begin to speak more seriously. Jean asks if Ash sees the spirit that constantly follows him closely. Instantly, the spirit of a small bird appears and begins relentlessly pecking Ash on the head. Jean is stunned, exclaims that she is being pecked mercilessly. Ash clarifies it is not a sharp sensation but an unbearable dull aching pain. Jean finds it very strange that such sharp pecking is described as a dull pain. He thoughtfully hums under his breath, leans closer to get a better look at the bird on Ash's shoulder. He notices a band of light around the neck and immediately understands it is a collar. Focusing his gaze, he activates his special ability to evaluate in order to learn more. The skill reveals the bird's goal is to make Ash and Lyra braver. Jin is completely confused by the strange result of the evaluation ability. Ash explains that his father bound a spirit to him when he was only 7 years old. Jean asks if Ash has a younger brother, and Ash tersely says it was for the sake of inheritance. Ash tells a strange story about his father's drunken night and the delivery of the spirit. In his family, there is a military history, and this spirit was supposed to teach him specifically. Jean thinks that it presents the strange goal of becoming braver in a positive light. The spirit seems completely puzzled. He does not know the difference between the sexes. Jin watches as the bird desperately pecks and suggests letting it go. At first, Ash hesitates and snorts disdainfully. He admits this was supposed to happen 2 years ago, but his father suddenly fainted. Hope flickered in his eyes as he asks if Jean can let it go. Jean believes that he will probably be able to somehow influence the collar that restrains the spirit. He says that as soon as they return to the city, it is worth trying to remove it. Ash agrees, sighs with relief, and sincerely promises that he will definitely repay. Suddenly, Jean remembers Ash's critical situation and feels that he forgot the reason. Dean wakes up and apologizes for spoiling his sister, but Ash gently corrects him. Jean explains that since Dean had a much closer connection with that dish, it gave him more influence. Dean decisively decides to take his sister to the spirit grove to be cleansed. He sincerely apologizes to Jean and Jean reassures him no serious harm was done. Jean suddenly realized there must also be a refuge for spirits in Canaan. A ghostly image of the spiritual world instantly flashed in his mind. He understands that in every city there is a special hideout where matters with spirits are resolved. Jean announced that he must return to the city to make the first preparations. He advises others to use a conveyor for hunting bears. Ash enthusiastically explains, a conveyor is a person who transports the traveler's prey. Jean hands Ash a note with all the details about the conveyor he had already requested. When they part ways, Jean throws one more word into the conversation. Dean confidently raises his thumb and promises that their abilities will remain secret. The deep dark forest is silent as the companions disperse. Suddenly there was a rustle in the bushes and two threatening wolves jumped out growling. Jean rushed forward, his sword blurred in motion, and he delivered a powerful slash. Ash enthusiastically praises Jean for precise and effective movements as the second wolf falls under his blade. Jean silently admires Ash's calm, balanced swordsmanship, feeling that his own skills are mere imitation. The hired carriers panic, their rented cart creaks under the weight of the wolves. Two men are struggling with all their might with an impossibly heavy load of wolf carcasses. Jean and Ash exchange glances, their wolf haul should suffice as compensation. Carrying the rest, Jean apologizes for the caused commotion, but Ash reassures him. Ash fears he might lie unconscious for several days, even longer than Dean. He finds no peace. Where is his valet who left alone? Jean tells Ash directly and sharply that he was abandoned, while the valet left him alone. With anxiety, Jean offers his home as a safe place for Ash. They approach Jean's sturdy wooden frame house standing within the city walls. In the simple house, Jean warmly welcomes Ash and invites him to sit. Ash praises his taste, and Jean is pleased that he repaired the rented house. Jean suddenly became embarrassed when he realized he smelled strongly of wild wolves. He shyly asks if Ash would like to request a hot bath. He promises to prepare the bath himself and tells Ash to wait there. Standing by the well, he decides to avoid public baths. They are too dirty and untidy there. By the crackling fireplace stands a large wooden tub filled with hot water and ready. Jin points Ash to the toilet upstairs and says he himself will be upstairs. Climbing the stairs, he intends to prepare a guest bed for Ash. He quietly thinks that he wants to install a real bath in this house. Finally clean, they settle down with cups of tea and Jin asks, "Shall we start?" Ash surrenders himself to Jin. The procedure is about to begin. Jin watches intently the little spirit bird sitting on Ash's shoulder. The bird starts pecking incessantly, the beak moves so fast it turns into a blurred spot. Jean gently touches the bird and dreamily thinks about how to deprive the light of its color. With a final burst of energy, the magical collar snapped sharply and crumbled. Ash utters a scream with pain in his voice when the connection suddenly breaks. He sways and falls forward, and Jin apologizes for such suddenness. Holding Ash, Jean notices that her chest is too flat to feel even a little arousal. He gently laid her on the bed, trying to bring her to consciousness. Jean sternly warns the freed bird, "Do not take revenge on Ash." He gently strokes the little bird and whispers to her to rest after what she had to endure. The bird peacefully settled on the pillow next to the sleeping Ash. Jin watches her closely, feeling relief the process went easier than expected. Jin decides to start arranging the third floor while his guest Ash recovers. Time passes and he works diligently, moving books and other household items. He carefully carries a tray with a drink to the bed of the still unconscious Ash. Jin is immersed in silence and reading, but does not take his watchful eye off the guest. From the house pressed against the mountain, he calls his friend Rish. He apologizes to Rish for neglecting him lately, gently stroking the happy little animal that gladly wags its tail. Rish blissfully enjoys the gentle scratches, his fur looks fluffy and lush. Jin notices Ash shows no signs of waking up soon. Suddenly someone calls his name, he shudders and snaps out of his thoughts. He turns around and sees that Mistu, Rudiel, and Pal have appeared in his room. Surprised, Jin asks his divine guests, "Why are you here?" Pal apologizes for the sudden visit and says he has a request for him. Rudiel earnestly asks him, "Give names to the spirits that fled there." Mistu explains that the cause of the problem is the reckless use of magic by his sister. She feels that the capricious and intrusive nature of his sister will soon push her to a rash act. She sadly says that many small spirits have already been used and they have disappeared. Jean repeats the unfamiliar name Namana, and his face shows confusion from this new news. He irritably realizes that Namjana is a ball of light. Jean boils with rage, not understanding why the creature that absorbs powers does not stop his sister. Mistu worries that if his sister can see spirits, she will subdue them all. Pal admits these spirits are so noisy that she can no longer endure it. Rudiel warns this situation will have a wide impact and severely limit the hero. Mistu insists, "Let Jean see the spirits himself, then he will understand." She tells him to look out the window to grasp the full scale of the problem. Jean takes a deep breath, calms down, and prepares for the place. A blink and his vision instantly changes when Rudiel orders him to look. He sees in horror shelves filled with countless tiny round spirits. Mistu explains they fled to him because of his ability to liberate. Rudiel says, "Give them names and no one will be able to rule over them." If his magic is really strong, the spirits will most likely choose him. Jin is stunned. He believes it is impossible to name so many spirits at once. Pal gently soothes him, "For names, even simple numbers will do for now." She adds that any name said at random will do for now. Jin is tormented by the thought that he sees as a contradiction in the logic of the spirits. He understands that he can give numerical names to those who lend him their power. Filled with determination, he prepares for the task because he knows he is doing it for his peaceful life. It all begins when he measuredly names red and green in turn. He does not stop and names them yellow 1, red 2, and blue 1. After 2 hours of tedious work, the task is still ongoing. He reaches yellow 52. Exhausted, he collapses on the table and says he needs a little rest. A small spirit gently pushes him on the cheek, encouraging him to continue. He gets up, suddenly remembers he needs to check how Ash is in the house. Sighing with relief, he activates his transition ability and instantly teleports away. He successfully breaks away from the crowd, but Mistu jokingly asks who Ash is. A small bird fluttered its wings and gently perched on Jean's shoulder. He confidently tells the curious Mistu that the little one is a spirit. Jean explains that after freeing her from the spirit, he now protects the settled Ash. Mistu listens to his explanation, and anxiety instantly appears on her face. She dramatically exclaims that the unconscious Ash is in a lady's crisis. Mistu stands over the sleeping Ash, still worried about the girl's crisis. Jean is puzzled. Does Mistu really perceive Ash as a woman? He firmly tells himself that he has no scandalous intentions toward the sleeping girl. Miss To winked and explained that she did not mean that kind of crisis. She reads a spell and announces that now everything will be fine. She proudly explains that this spell prevents Ash from messing with the toilet in his sleep. Jin sincerely thanks her, blushing with embarrassment that he himself had not thought of such a simple, practical thing. He changes the subject and asks Miss To what the name of that little bird is. Jin explained that he used the skill of appraisal and thus found out that the bird's name is Ryu. He tells the curious Miss To that his previous contract is no longer valid. The little bird, he says, wants him to give her a new name. He grimaces at his terrible taste in names, brushing off Fluffy-chan. Inspired by its beautiful blue feathers, he contemplates a new name. He suggests the name Aju, and the bird raises its head up with interest. The bird gently snuggles up to him, showing its approval of the new name. Jin explains that he took his name from the Italian word Azzurri. Then he asks the newly named Azza to watch over the sleeping Ash. He thinks that Ash will be upset if the bird disappears as soon as she wakes up. Jean and Mistu decided to take up the task again of giving names to the spirits. Later that night, under the starry sky, more guests appear in the yard. Jean cannot believe his eyes. Kato and Ish also came to help. He again undertakes the long process of giving names to the bright spirits hovering in the air. Finally, everything is finished. Now he plans to visit them once or twice a month. Pal strictly tells him to wait before he tries to use his light magic. A dazzling flash of light burst out and engulfed him, and Mistu watched it with admiration. Pal whispers to him that it is now safe. He has dimmed the light with darkness. Ish and Mistu explain that many light spirits cause this. Kato sternly reminds him of the danger not knowing one's limits. Jin understands that now he must imagine his magic much more precisely, and with maximum concentration. Suddenly, his stomach growled, a sign that his magical experiments have come to an end. Jin announces, the time has come. The group of spirits is ready for dinner. He politely asks if they would like to eat just in case. Everyone shouts out their specific requests, and he falls into despair because of this. Instead, Jin prepares a real, full dinner: soup, rice, and fish. He savors his tasty butajuro soup, pure bliss on his face. After a long night, a simple hot dish is such a welcome comfort. Mistu happily eats honey, and Pal elegantly sips a glass of wine. Two elder spirits, Kato and Rudiel, enjoy the simple food. Jean finds the whole scene terribly surreal, and one particular detail impresses him especially. The young spirit silently and steadfastly eats simple salt from the bowl. Jin anxiously worries about Isha's health, but the boy remains completely calm. This prompts him to ask whether spirits can eat human food at all. Mistu clarifies that spirits resembling humans can eat, but do not taste. She explains that non-humanoid spirits feed on what corresponds to their nature. Jin understands everything, and at that moment his companion Rich appears. He gently asks the creature to wait. They are still eating. Powell's face hardens as she accuses her former mentor of intrigues. Jean is puzzled. Why is she suddenly so hostile to the little creature? Miss Hito rejoices at this sweet scene. They had never before managed to get so close to Rich. She apologizes and sincerely admits they are still somewhat distrustful of Rich. Jin is completely puzzled by the strange dynamics between the spirits. An old god named Kato revealed the truth to Jean. Rich was once a deity who shook worlds. He continues his dark story against the backdrop of the image of this confident, seemingly innocent creature. Jin froze in shock and could not believe it. Could his dear companion be an alpha dog? The young goddess Mistu looks completely confused by the unfamiliar word alpha. Sitting at the table with Rish, Jean eagerly explains what the #1 PACS leader is. He enthusiastically explains what rules people need to properly get along with such pack animals. Miss Hito loudly notes that Rish is a wolf spirit and disagrees that he can be so simply compared to a dog. Jin wonders if the rules for wolves and spirits are different, glancing at the others. Kato throws a final warning, reminding that Rish once shone with intelligence and could speak. Looking at his dear companion, Jin decided, for now he would see only cuteness in him. He sincerely thanks Kato for the warning and promises to take care of it and think about it a little later. Suddenly Miss Tu leaned closer and called Jin her sweetie. He blushed shyly. When the gods were preparing to leave, Miss To waved his hand, entrusting the other spirits with the care of the genes. The dark-haired goddess cast Jin one last inquisitive glance and left. She looks at Riesh, who is gasping for breath, and calls him a noble, lonely wolf. Jin stands alone in the night darkness and carefully gazes at the place where the gods disappeared. He quietly reflects on how the goddess described Riesh as a lonely wolf. Riesh playfully rolls onto his back and Jin cannot help but wonder, is this all some clever performance? Enough of the evening adventures, he decides to wash up and go to sleep. The next day he walks the streets of the town with a new assignment. In the shop he finally confesses why he came to this potter's town to order a bathtub. Admiring the tea set, he mentally decides to buy himself new dishes later. From the outside, the large brick kilns of the town tower against the cloudy sky. Potter Malcolm introduced himself and immediately guessed Jin probably had a new idea for a product. Jin smiles and says he has an idea for the bath, then introduces himself in response. Holding a scroll with his design, he waits for Potter's thoughtful reply. Malcolm exclaims that this is a gift from heaven, as recently a nobleman asked about the bath. The vision of his sister and her friend finally confirms for Jin who belongs to the nobility. Jin eagerly asks for help to develop it, and Malcolm agrees he believes it will be worth the effort. As he leaves, Jin feels a strange sensation, as if their lives suddenly intertwined. In a quiet, sunlit room, a young man with light ash-colored hair slowly begins to stir. Ash woke up abruptly, eyes wide open in confusion in an unfamiliar room. Jin leans over, asking if he is okay, and Ash sincerely thanks him for the help. Ash says his back hurts, and Jin suspects it is because he slept for so long. Looking at the starry sky outside, Ash cannot understand. Is it still morning or already evening? Jin shows 3 fingers and calmly tells the stunned Ash that it is the 3rd day. Ash sincerely apologized because of the little bird, but Jin just waved it off. Don't worry, it's a trifle. He admits while Ash was unconscious, he gave the little bird a new name. Ash asks what name Jin gave the bird that gently rubbed its beak against his finger. Jin looked at him and simply said the new name he chose for the bird, Azu. A warm, gentle smile blooms on Ash's face, and he says that it's a beautiful name. Ash explains that if the spirit accepted the name, it means it took a liking to Jin. Suddenly, Jin said how handsome Ash looks without his usual furrowed brow. Ash says that the bird Azu also seems to be very attached to him. He clarifies Ash is a handsome young man, so certain people are drawn to him. Jin sternly warns Ash, don't let yourself be deceived and don't end up in someone's bed. A drop of sweat appears on Jin's temple as he contemplates that awkward situation. Ash, embarrassed and a little worried, asks if Jin deceived him. The word bed made Ash jump. He suddenly understood the hint in his question. Jin quickly calmed the still uncertain Ash, assuring him that he was safe and no one had deceived him. He suggests cooking soup, and Ash, with a trembling voice, asks if he can really stay. Jin insists he is not so heartless as to throw him out on the street at night. With a gentle smile, he encourages Ash, get well and return your stolen money. Ash agrees and adds that he also needs to pay rent. Jin finds this very fair. Later, they found themselves outside, in front of a large timber-framed building in the town. In the noisy tavern, a voice cut through the noise. Someone called note. Jin and Ash lifted their eyes from the table, their attention caught by the call. An elderly butler, as if exhaling, hurriedly runs up with relief and solemnly addresses Ash as his master. Jin silently watches as Note respectfully bows to Ash in the middle of the tavern. He looks closely at the crowd and sees, some have spirits but not the person he is looking for. A man with chestnut hair, Dean, appeared and greeted the group with a smile. Dean offers to buy Jin a drink as an apology for their tense first meeting. Note solemnly introduces himself, explaining his role as Ash's uninvited companion. He waved it off. A few more people in the group won't change anything. Large wooden mugs full of frothy beer stand on the table ready for the party. Jin notices a small spirit on Dean's shoulder and sees him reaching out to such creatures. Dean explains that his sister Amel was taken to the spirit gazebo to have a spirit exorcised from her. He sighed heavily and added that Amel has to correct her spoiled behavior to get her job back. On the black panel you read, an unintentional spirit joke can happen to anyone. Ash sternly warns, such pranks sometimes turn into terrible tragedies. Dean accepts Ash's warning and realizes the full gravity of his sister's situation. Ash mentally notes that Dean, although he looks distracted, is actually quite clever. Sipping the drink, he tells Dean that the money stolen from him by scammers will soon be returned. While Dean grumbles about the wet nuts, Dean says he stayed at a boarding house. Dean asks in a note if it is possible to rent a 2-room house for a short time. Dean sips ale and thinks about his guilty pleasure drinking, even though he is not yet an adult in this world. Dean draws Dean's attention and is about to ask him for something. He asks Jin if he would like to accompany a mid-level adventurer. Dean explains that this traveler is not very strong but very reliable. Jin readily agrees, saying that such an acquaintance will really help a lot. Dean suggests meeting the next day at the same time to continue. As they part, Ash hints that he has one last word. Ash warns both Jin and Dean, "You're kind of strange, so be careful." Jin jokingly nudges Ash, "Smooth your eyebrows if something seems strange to you." Strava peeks from around the corner, steaming with anger because she is sure strange people will definitely approach her. A new chapter begins. Jin wakes up in a cozy bed, still sleepy. He gets up and gently greets his fluffy companion Rich. "Good morning." Holding Rich in his arms, he exclaimed, "Oh," excitedly, seeing what was outside the window. He looks out the window at the snowy mountain and realizes it is snowing. He begins to prepare breakfast. The soup is slowly simmering and the egg is sizzling together with the bacon. It is visible how Jin generously spreads a thick layer of jam on a slice of toast. He happily bit off a large piece of toast that he had made for himself. He savors the combination of sour plum jam and cheese, and the cheese stretches in a long thread. Sipping the drink, he silently reflects on the approaching winter. The memory of his unhappy times in the mountains sharply contrasts with the current comfort. Having finished eating, he bowed his head and quietly whispered "thank you," looking at his now empty plate. He decides the time has come to prepare for the meeting with the acquaintance Dean. He arrives at the medieval town of Canaan, ready for his introduction. In a dark cloak, Jin waits for the meeting to begin. Ash and his butler not stand nearby, they wait silently, their faces serious and calm. Ash approaches Jin with a serious expression. He wants to talk about the payment for the potion. Slightly irritated, Jin asks if it really needs to be discussed again, adding that he did not expect compensation. With a gloomy expression, Ash admitted that he did not even think the potion would really work. Jin offers a compromise. He promises to ask for money only when Ash settles down properly. By the way, Ash's butler intervenes, apologizes, and agrees to Jin's generous terms. The scene shifts to a warm, candlelit interior of the local tavern. Inside, Dean with a smile introduces Jin to a hardened, bearded traveler named Let's. Let's greet him by admitting that formalities are not his thing and he prefers to speak simply. When they shook hands, Jin realized this is the relentless traveler he had heard about. His friendly expression suddenly changed when he turned around and shouted Dean's name. He grumbles that Dean did not mention Jin's beauty because he considers her too feminine. Dean winks, admits he has already made one mistake, he cannot allow himself another. Jin blames himself for the fact that there are so many beautiful people around. Because of them, everything became awkward. When Jin tries to get his attention, he scares the distracted Let's. The embarrassed Let's apologize for being momentarily distracted and suggest they set off. Dean calmly says that he is just doing what he was asked. Quietly, Jin asks Dean if they have a complex about handsome men. Their journey begins, and for Jin, this is the first time he hires an adventurer to fulfill a request. The three set off into the forest, their boots crunching on the snow. Let's talk about his cunning plan to hunt rabbits this season for valuable fur and meat. He explains that the meat of horned monsters is so tough that you hardly earn anything from them. Jin was quite confused to learn that the rewards for hunting bears have recently dropped. A drop of sweat ran down his forehead. Jin thought that probably he and Ash were the reason. The traveler begins his lesson, vividly showing how to find animal trails in the grass. Jin is truly impressed by Let's' professionalism and cold confidence. Standing over the tracks in the snow and pointing at them, Let's explain the unique gait of the rabbit. Then he looks closely and says that the other paw prints belong to a fox. When Jin asks for clarification, Let's reveal that these tracks belong to a horned rabbit. He realized this is a monster from the claw marks. It is clear that it was chasing prey. Jin thoughtfully runs through in his mind his simple way of using tracking and the sword. Let's be frank, a simple short bow is not a suitable weapon for hunting monsters. With training, skill, and burning focus, he draws the bowstring and aims. His arrow hits the mark without fail. The horned rabbit squeaks. Note, monsters are easier to hit, they charge straight at you. When one hunt ended, he announced that now he would show Jin how to hunt a fox. Returning to the city, the merchant enthusiastically praises Let's for the excellent quality of his pelts. Jin is surprised at how talkative and friendly he becomes when doing business. To celebrate their success, the group gathers in the tavern, raising their glasses. Jin sincerely thanks Let's for the valuable lessons he took from their walk. Let's call Jin a weirdo and question his decision to study his methods. Jin thinks to himself that his fighting style suits his slender body better. Dean cheerfully announces that drinks are on him today. The frame takes us to a house cozily hidden under a snowy mountain beneath a starry sky. Alone, Jin looks at his hand, and in his eyes burns a new, firm determination. The next day, he takes up new training, starting with energetic push-ups. Eagerly, he visits the workshop of a local craftsman to find out if his special order is ready. The craftsman proudly shows a majestic, shiny white bathtub on legs resembling claws. After Jin sincerely thanked him, the craftsman asked, "How are you going to transport this?" Jin suddenly got confused and began to fuss, realizing he had completely forgotten about logistics. Inside, he panics. He knows he cannot use his ability to hide things in front of people. Stammering, he insists that he has a ready method, and the craftsman offers to wrap it up. The craftsman and his assistant help carry the large wrapped tub to a secluded place. When they leave, Jin waits until he is completely alone. He looks around tensely to make sure no one is watching. He sighs and thoughtfully reflects on how hard it is to use his storage skill when things are so big. Gentle snow quietly begins to fall on the framed houses of the town. Jin begins the renovation first. He strips off the old, cracked tiles. Then he goes out into the yard and starts digging a trench near the well. He, concentrating, carefully lays a new brick wall. Looking at his progress, a proud and satisfied smile spreads across his face. He stands in the newly finished bathroom and proudly says, "Project completed." A sudden knock on the door interrupted his moment of satisfaction. He opens it and sees Ash, who apologizes for disturbing him. Ash smiles and says he brought a housewarming gift. Surprised that Ash found a new home, Jin couldn't help but ask where it is located. Ash simply points to the building standing right next to Jin's house. Jin warmly welcomes him to the neighborhood, and Ash awkwardly apologizes for suddenly being so close. Ash admits that his butler did find a home, although they never said where Jin lived. Jin does not believe in coincidence and admits himself that it is probably his fault. Recalling the conversation with Jin, Ash admits that he was happy then. Jin froze. He was completely stunned by the sudden and passionate confession. Ash notices the cold and asks to be let inside. Jin agrees. In the house, Jin offers the new neighbor a warm drink. They sit together at the table, and Jin thanks Ash for the housewarming gift. The gift turns out to be a beautiful and incredibly appetizing fig tart. After biting a piece, Jin exclaimed that this is the best tart he has ever eaten in this city. Jin enthusiastically praises the skill of Ash's butler. He recommended such a wonderful bakery. The conversation suddenly changed. Ash shifted it to another topic. He asks Jin, "Haven't you ordered something for the house recently?" Jin calmly confirms that he ordered a bathtub for himself, and this statement leaves Ash at a loss. Ash blushed and got confused when he realized that the word bathtub was misunderstood. Because it's easier to show than to explain, Jin leads him to a new room. Ash froze at what he saw and skeptically asks if it really is a bathtub. The flawlessly white bathtub on elegant claw feet shines in the light. Completely mesmerized, Ash admits that he has never seen anything so beautiful. Jin barely smiles and says that the walls are not dry yet, but invites Ash to try it soon. Delighted by the offer, Ash asks if he can call his butler, Note. In a few minutes, Note appears and, entering, respectfully bows. Ash kneels by the bathtub and, alongside his faithful butler, admiringly marvels at its beauty. With a sparkle in his eyes, he excitedly tells Note that Jin allowed him to use it. Jin suddenly got confused, completely forgot that Ash is a young lady. Note, feeling that he must restrain her, admits that he himself is intrigued. Then two men set off to inspect the kitchen. Both Ash and Note surprisingly noticed there is not a single unpleasant smell here. The Note asks, which workshop did Jin hire to build such a complex structure? Jin hesitated a little, then calmly took all the credit for himself. The butler froze in shock. Jin's statement was simply incredible. Ash firmly confirms to the stunned butler, Jin really did it. The Note urgently asks if Jin considered registering this invention with the guild. The butler insisted, register it quickly, and this decision made Jin incredibly rich. In the middle of the blizzard, Jin anxiously talks about this bad situation. Surrounded by a desolate snowy forest, he groans from the piercing cold. Finally, it becomes clear why he came to the lake. He needs to make a new bedding. Watching the horned geese, he wants to finish the job as soon as possible and return home. With usual skill, his glove gently and precisely places the arrow on the bowstring. Aiming, he focuses on being quiet and careful so as not to startle the prey. The arrow, with a thin cord behind it, rushes through the air straight to the birds. His shot hits one of the geese. It cried out in pain. A victorious expression flashes on his face, and he shouts about his success. Standing over the icy water, he holds his breath, preparing to pull out his catch. Startled, he sees other birds of prey flying into the smell of blood. To escape the new threat, he instantly activated his ability to teleport. Now safely standing on the stone path, he sighed with relief. At home, a warm, friendly fire crackles cozily in the fireplace. He decides to warm up a bit before setting out again to continue his hunt. Soon a fist struck firmly on the wooden door. The butler opens the door and warmly welcomes Jin Dono. Jin replies that his move is going wonderfully, all thanks to the valuable help of Note. Ash explains that Note was like a foreman, and because of this, the house became very cramped. For the housewarming, Jin gives Note a large, neatly wrapped futon. The butler freezes upon learning that it is made from the feathers of horned geese. He exclaims that it must be an incredibly expensive luxury item. Ash wonders how he managed to hunt these wary geese and considers the gift too generous. Jin awkwardly admits that he did not understand its value because he paid very little for it. Seeing an opportunity, Ash invited Jin and Note to join her for dinner. Note hastily tries to justify himself and asks the host to enjoy the meal. The butler insists that it would be impolite for him to dine with Ash. Ash waved off the formalities, and Jean confirmed that the invitation was for both. They served a luxurious banquet, a huge roasted piece of meat, and many other dishes. Jin explains that he prepared his version of fig tart. Not is admiring the luxurious roast of horned geese. A close-up shows the shiny, perfectly cooked crust of the baked meat. All three gratefully expressed words of thanks for the food, and only then began to eat. Biting the tart, Ash's face lit up. She exclaimed that it was incredibly tasty. He eagerly savors the exquisite turnip soup and immediately memorizes the recipe. Jean looks at Ash. She is so absorbed in the food that it scares him a little. Watching her eat, he feels as if he is beginning to understand her better. Ash says that delicious food always lifts her mood. Jin reaches for his piece of tart and Not tries to stop him. Suddenly, the black spirit crashed into the tart and completely destroyed the dessert. Not and Ash watch attentively, their faces serious and focused. Jean remained completely puzzled and asked what just happened. His spirits cornered the black invader, whose origin Ash does not know. He decided it was better not to tell the butler about his ability to see spirits. Realizing he would have to explain something, he prepares to pretend he knows nothing. He suggests applying a temperature shock and immediately adds that he will bring another tart. Jean steps away and thoughts rush through his mind. He is frantically searching for a solution. Not silently watches him leave with a knowing and thoughtful look. In another room, Jean was racking his brains, how to contain the captured spirit. He mutters that now he is in trouble because he ended up in a pickling jar. He enthusiastically praises his spirit companions Rose and Hana for a wonderful job. He comes across an enamel jar, how glad he is that he brought it from another house. The voice of Not from the threshold scared him and immediately asked, "What happened?" Jean jumps up in surprise when Not apologizes, and it turns out that the spirit is actually his familiar. Jean suddenly realizes that it was the note that provoked everything and learns that the spirit's name is Quinn. The note says that his lineage must never surpass the main line of Alderhood. He points to his features: ash-gray hair and amber eyes. Jean asks if Ash knows that Not can interact with spirits, something Ash himself cannot do. He silently wonders why they do not live freely, even though they have been forsaken. Riley tells Not that his spirit should use the front entrance next time. Not examines the container and immediately senses its peculiar fermenting smell. Jean has come to terms with it. The butler now knows his secret. The scene shifts into silence under the starry sky. A new day awakens in the bustling port. Town ships are docked in the harbor. Jin enters the bustling market. This is how his search for information begins. The fish seller chases away the curious white cat from his goods. Jin paused for a moment, gazing into the noisy port. He remembered hearing that his sister had recklessly played with magic here. The diagram shows how human magic first drains power from spirits. The exhausted spirit then fills with deep resentment. It is this hidden resentment that eventually transforms the spirit into a monster. Jin came to check whether the hero's magic had affected the surrounding world. He overheard fishermen angrily complaining about constant attacks by people from Schluntas. Another fisherman confirms, during the raids several of his men were wounded. They grumble that the local hero only causes them problems. Someone grimly wishes for a demon lord to appear and deal with this situation. When a pickpocket tries to steal his pouch, Jean swiftly grabs him. He mentally reviews the pickpocket's attempt. He decides to postpone the investigation and heads home with a package of fresh seafood. The shot outside reveals his large stone house covered in snow. On the table is a wonderful plate of fresh and baked oysters, ready to be eaten. He savors a fresh oyster, and pure delight shines on his face. He is grateful that his tasting skills allow him to eat them without any worries. He imagines other delicious ways to prepare oysters. Looking at the leftovers, he wondered, should he marinate them in oil? He suggests playing with his fluffy friend Rish. Rish, with curiosity on his face, sniffs the outstretched hand. The dog-like creature turned its head and snorted lightly. Jin wonders if Reese dislikes the sharp smell of seafood. Noticing that daylight is fading, he casually asks to turn on the light. The window explodes with a blinding white flash. He twitches in pain and covers his burning eyes with his hands. He decides to work on magic control before visiting the guild. He steps into the demon forest to begin his training. He releases a powerful fire spell of fireball straight at the roaring monster. The spell envelops the terrible horned rabbit, pulling it into a whirlpool of flames. He feels stronger than he imagined and must learn to control his power. A montage shows him dealing with monsters using various elemental spells. He feels that thanks to concentration training, he has become significantly better. He worries if he overdid the hunting, standing over a pile of fallen monsters. In the dark forest, a young man seems to create a tiny ball of light as if by magic. The scene opens before us, a large wooden frame building of the Adventurers Guild during the day. Jean approaches the guild doors, preparing to look at the task board in search of information. He overhears a passionate voice from inside insisting, One must go deep into the forest and figure things out. Peeking inside, Jean sees a blonde man bitterly complaining about the absence of three-horned monsters. Dean firmly from the guild sharply said he would not approve such a risky expedition. Banging his fist, Dean showed how formidable those three-horned beasts were. The blonde named Chris insists that their absence indicates a much scarier threat, permeated by a black shadow. Jean is completely confused by the theatrical and tense manner of this bright man. He anxiously tries to match the name Chris to the face Dean just pronounced it. Two more, a young man and an older man, affirm that Jean returned very recently. Seeing him, Chris enthusiastically greets Jean with a strange title, Bear Killer Dono. This nickname stuns Jean, while Chris praises him for supposed understanding. In the flashback, it is seen how Dean used to grumble at the blonde Dean and the nobles. Inside himself, Jean decides that this man is a real headache. Chris charmingly smiles at him, gives another strange nickname, and seems to reveal the Twilight. Completely confused by the new name, Jean listens as his companion agrees that it fits. The man introduced himself. I am Chris Ids, an adventurer of the silver 3-star rank. Jean shook his hand and awkwardly asked him to stop poetically describing his features. Chris simply hums thoughtfully, carefully examining his clasped hands. Then he directly asks Evening Twilight to join his hunt. Jean's head spun when he realized he was unwillingly dragged into something strange. On the chapter cover, Chris once again formally asks Jean to go with him. Jean's inner monologue confirms his feeling. He is stuck in some strange situation. He points out a flaw in Chris's logic, and Dean barely suppresses laughter. Chris admits he hasn't seen monsters, but he feels some deep unease in the forest. With shining confidence, he declares that he will risk everything, relying only on his intuition. Dean is shocked and doesn't understand how Chris can rely solely on a simple premonition. Impatiently, Dean says to Chris, "Hurry up, explain yourself." Jean tries to ease the tension and says that the hunt can be postponed until spring. Jean's senior partner quietly wonders if Chris's intuition is something special. He tells Jean that Chris might be under the influence of an invisible spirit seer. The man clarifies, essentially Chris is possessed by a spirit. Jean feels the favor of such a spirit is a serious matter, because seer spirits are almost impossible to find. He begins to understand that Chris might hide some subtle abilities, for example, foresight or resistance to sunburn. Dean grumbles that for such a hunt he will have to participate personally, and even on a silver rank. Chris slyly reminds him of Jean's debt to the guild, related to his sister. He says this is a short mission, the goal is only one monster. Dean wants to involve gold-rank adventurers so the city will be safe. Chris insists again that something is just wrong in the forest. A quiet blonde guy decisively interrupts the argument, demanding they get to the point. Dean turns to Jean and begs him to join the forest expedition. With one quick hand movement, Jean sharply and immediately refused. Dean instantly backs off and offers another proposal, saying Jean will only be a baggage carrier. Jean tells himself he is a bit curious about what is going on there. He finally gives in and agrees to go. Dean glows with unexpected joy. Jean set a condition: he wants his friends Ash and not to go with him. Dean agrees and suggests waiting until spring, that way they will avoid heavy snow. Later, Jean sits by the fire, and outside his window a house dusted with snow is visible. He suspects that his sister's too strong magic is stirring the forest. He cannot stand cleaning up her mess, so he decides to check the forest himself. He sets off into the ominous depths of the demon forest under the night sky. Standing alone in the cold snow, he prepares to visit the local spirits. Turning on his vision, he saw a world teeming with countless glowing spirits. A tiny winged spirit, like a fairy, gracefully flutters through the magical air. A fox spirit jumps through shimmering sparks of light. A dark, shapeless blot spirit ominously hovers among the others. He notices that some spirits are weakening, shrinking, and even disappearing completely. To his horror, he sees a strong black spirit devouring a dying one. Up close, it is visible how the black spirit attacks a weakened, cross-eyed creature. Janu finds it extremely unpleasant to watch this act of spiritual cannibalism. Knowing that his healing will not work, he decides to give them names to provide them with stability. He extends his hand and sharply grabs a small shadow spirit in his palm. Gently holding the creature, he gives it a name, Black. He finds another dark spirit and calls it Black Second. Hugging to his chest a dark spirit resembling a rabbit, he named it Black 3. In his hands, the shadowy squirrel-like spirit transforms into Black 4. Feeling tired from the effort, he decides that enough is enough for today. He realizes that naming these reluctant spirits requires an incredible amount of strength. Chasing them has become exhausting, so he decides to continue the work tomorrow. He walks through the snow, fresh tracks trailing behind him, and he approaches a stone house. Standing at the door, he shouted, "Denoso, are you there?" Denoso tightly hugged him, an embrace that Jean still wasn't used to. Jean presents his gifts, wine and cake, and Denoso simply glows with absolute delight. The children in the house greet him, and their faces shine with happiness. They fell on him in group hugs, and he was convinced they are truly very affectionate. Denoso gratefully takes a pouch of wine from his friend. Shiva the mother thanks him and suggests, let's all enjoy the cake together. Denoso longs for his favorite wine, while Shiva asks what they were doing before his arrival. The basket of beans seems to tell about their winter work shelling beans and repairing farming tools. Jean offers to help the children working near the fire. Shiva approaches, carrying pieces of freshly made cake for everyone. The children happily savor the delicious cake that Jean brought for them. Denoso's daughter, Tina, boldly says that one day she will marry Jean. While Shiva accepts this statement with a smile, Denoso categorically forbids it. He insists that Tina once promised to marry him, and Jean tries to calm everything down. Denoso flared up with anger at Jean's not yet, thinking that he was insulting his daughter. Instead, two young boys suddenly announce that they will get married and become part of Jean's family. They grab Jean, and he is stunned. Their grip turned out to be unexpectedly strong. Denoso looks confused and broken by his son's unexpected statement. He bursts into the cheerful scuffle, trying to pull his sons away from the embarrassed Jean. Shiva and Tina watch the family chaos unfold and laugh joyfully. Standing aside and watching, he bitterly thinks that his own family has never been so warm. With the arrival of spring, the time has finally come to set out on the expedition. Chris greets Jean and Ash with their spectacular nicknames, Evening Twilight and Moonlight Glow. Jean, squeezing Chris's hand, is puzzled by another strange nickname. A bearded traveler named Let's called out to Jean, greeting him. He warns Jean, be careful because the battle will be taken on by Chris's squad. Another adventurer anxiously points out Let's inexperience, but Let's smiles and corrects the bear hunter is Ash. Ash quietly confirms this, and Chris with another adventurer remain confused. The wild adventure shows that Ash is known as a bear hunter, but Ash denies it. He insisted that their companion, a young man named Jean, provoked the whole situation. A striking blonde named Chris bursts out with delighted, flowery laughter. He confidently said that his premonition about Twilight came true, and Jean could not help but ponder some spiritual influence. Jean suddenly became convinced. The strange nickname is the work of Chris's own spirit. He could not take his eyes off the tiny fairy who gently touched Chris's prominent chin. Tina from the guild addressed the group, eagerly awaiting joint work. She politely thanks Jean for the cooperation and sincerely apologizes for any past inconveniences. Her gaze caught on his backpack, she asks to measure its size later. At farewell, she gives him an exquisitely decorated flask on behalf of the guild. She sincerely wishes them a safe return while the squad prepares to set out on the expedition. Having reached the trail, let's ask about that feature of Jean's bag and what is inside it. Jean explains, I made the leather pouch myself, and that roll on top is bedding. The comrades worried that the bulky futon would become a burden in battle. He clearly demonstrates the practical design, how the straps and clips allow it to be easily detached. Chris unfavorably compares his bag and jokingly scolds his caring spirit who strokes his chin. Four adventurers confidently step into the very heart of the forest. They walk precisely and lightly, faces focused, as they overcome the wild terrain. After some time, one of the comrades waved his hand and suggested making a lunch break. Having made good progress, the group set up a small camp near a babbling brook. Jean kneels beside his backpack and pulls out a large pot for their food. By the crackling fire, he prepares a stew of dried chicken, onions, and mushrooms. While the ingredients bubble cheerfully in the pot, he joyfully announces, the dish is ready. Then he shifts his attention to another part of the meal he prepared specially. He solemnly brings out an incredibly large, beautifully arranged loaf with shiny stuffed sandwiches for everyone. A companion whose mouth is watering looks admiringly at the incredible meal Jean brought. When Jean offers to share, everyone immediately eagerly reaches for the appetizing-looking food. Another traveler enthusiastically praises the meat, but prefers harder bread and asks about the coating. The elder in their group looks surprised and repeats the word. Jean passionately explains how to bread and fry, but silently omits the recipe for his complex sauce. Ash picks up a piece of fried chicken and enthusiastically praises its appetizing, spicy flavor. Jean lists the complex seasonings and carefully studies the recipe by heart. Full and happy after the meal, the adventurers decided it was time to move on. The group's boots stomp along the grassy path, and they set off on the road again. Jean notices his shoes getting covered in mud and wonders if it's because of the way he walks. He notices Note's shiny, flawless shoes and admires the skill of the butlers. Deciding to adopt the butler's gait, he immediately pays attention to Chris's warning about wolves. Chris explains that wolves hunt in packs and advises them to act on their own initiative. Jean and Ash listen intently to the instructions and both agree with the battle plan. Jean admits to himself, Chris is truly a careful leader, although he annoys him a bit. Suddenly, a warning scream sounded. A threatening pack of horned wolves burst out of the forest. The wolves suddenly began circling and tightening the circle around Jean, choosing him specifically. Riley realizes they probably see him as the weakest, while a comrade shouts his name. With a determined expression on his face, he raises his sword, preparing to face the immediate and direct threat. He rushes forward, his blade becoming a blurred streak of motion as he prepares to strike. His stance is low and focused, the polished steel of his sword gleaming ready for battle. He unleashes a powerful, sweeping horizontal strike that cleaves the air toward the beak. After the fight, we stood frozen in shock, looking at the fallen wolves and doubting Jean's strength. Chris exclaims excitedly that Jean was luring men, and Jean, embarrassed, denies it. Dean says that Jean is not who she seems, and he feels his own skills are insufficient. Note calmly begins to cut off the horns, warning that the blood will attract other monsters. Dean agreed with the assessment and urged the whole group to leave quickly. The group continues through the darkening forest, getting closer to the camp where they are to spend the night. The chapter ends, opening the way to the next part of their forest expedition. Arriving at the camp, Jean quickly and skillfully sets up a simple but reliable tent. Kneeling on the ground, he looks over his work with satisfaction and considers it sufficient. A comrade approached and, clearly surprised, exclaimed that Jean sets up camp so skillfully, although he himself said he doesn't like camping. Chris theatrically praises Jean as a genius, and Jean calmly explains, "I am skilled, but I don't enjoy it." He admits he honed his survival skills by living alone on an island for several months. Impressed by how Jean used moss as a pillow, Chris decides to go and gather more. The others still join him, although one of them is worried because of tradition in his culture. It is not accepted to pick moss from the mountain. Two men loudly declared that they would go fishing for dinner. Jean offers to prepare a warm soup for everyone, just what is needed on this cold night. A small pot quietly bubbles over the fire, promising a warm, comforting dinner for the tired travelers. Jean announces the menu, hearty tomato soup. He just needs to prepare the dough. Dean scratches his head. Something from the previous conversation flickers vaguely and confusingly in his memory. He watches Jean's strange hand gestures over the dough in fascination and wonders if it is some kind of ceremony. Under Jean's touch, the dough seemed to magically expand and turned into a large, perfectly smooth, shimmering sphere. He decided to let the dough rise, noting that it would also make a good breakfast. Night falls. The company gathers around the campfire under a scattering of stars. A luxurious banquet unfolds on the table. Steaming soup, deliciously brown baked fish, and a huge pizza tempting everyone. When asked, Jean explained that the pizza was made from cheese, bacon, and asparagus gathered in the forest. Chris, confused and surprised, says he has never heard of a dish called pizza. Dean, still embarrassed, asks Jean about that strange ritual he performed earlier. He takes a piece, and a long, stretchy string of melted cheese stretches from his mouth. His eyes widen with delight, and he exclaims that the new dish is simply incredibly tasty. Note gives a subtle feedback and suggests that tomato sauce would also be a good addition. The elder man looks thoughtfully, surprised by the suggestion to use tomato sauce. Suddenly, Gina is struck by a thought. Has he ever even seen a fresh tomato? He thinks about sun-dried tomatoes in the soup while the ash praises its taste. Jean of Chris pat on the shoulder, his face sincere and slightly touched. He says that Jean would be a wonderful wife, mourning and saying it's a pity that he is a man. Dean bluntly asks Jean about his type, wondering if his sister's breasts are not too flat. Ash, embarrassed, blurts out that Dean has a huge torso, not what a woman would want. Note silently watched and suddenly realized. Because of this conversation, he found himself in a difficult position. Jean says that he is still getting used to people, so he does not know his type. He says that he only knew unreliable people, and at that moment, a memory of a young woman surfaces. Chris lets jokingly discard the idea that the confessions he received were malicious pranks. Dean suggests that the confessions could have been serious, and the confessors shyly blushed because of it. Jean vividly retells the chronology of the confessions of different people made when they were young. The companion looks stunned at the number and jokingly asks if Jean is cursed. It must be admitted that there is something special about his genes, and to reassure him not all women are like that. Jean's face became gloomy when he admitted that his sister was the very cause of everything. In his memory, he sees his sister with her friends, and it becomes clear that they were all connected to her. He explains that he felt like her possession and eventually just gave in to her games. Chris patted him on the shoulder and encouraged him with simple words to lift his spirits. Ash is silent, with a gloomy and thoughtful expression on his face after Jean's story. Under the starry sky, the forest is silent. The night watch begins. Jean sits alone by the crackling campfire and sips from a cup in the cold air. He raises his gaze to the night sky and feels that it is still so cold here. During the night watch, Jean warmly greets his little bird companion Aza as she softly lands on his shoulder. From the darkness came a voice suggesting to relieve Jean from the watch. Jean raised his eyes in the dim light of the fire. He saw Ash approaching him. Ash offers a Florentine biscuit as a snack, and Jean sincerely thanks him for everything. Putting on the garment that Jean sewed, Ash does not hide his surprise. It is so light and comfortable. Jean modestly explains that the coat is just a hobby, and adds that the debt for the potion has already been paid. Seeing Ash's gloomy face, Jean became worried. Maybe he did not like those Florentine cookies he offered. Ash gently hints that those previous romantic confessions were just accidental pranks, and for a moment leaves Jean speechless. Suddenly Jean realizes. Ash recalls their previous conversation and tries to encourage him. Jean admits that he is learning to trust people again, and Ash is glad to be part of this. He quietly accepts Ash's kind words, like a little bird perched on his shoulder. Ash takes guard, sits by the campfire, and Jean agrees to allow them. He thinks that Ash is a straightforward person, and he feels a bit embarrassed by direct compliments. Ash's openness and sincerity are refreshing. They sharply contrast with the character of his own sister. After handing over the watch, Jean finally decides it's time to rest to meet the next day. The travelers gladly enjoy a hearty meal. It seems to them that they eat better on the road than in the city. Two men are eagerly devouring fried meat, and one of them loudly says that he really wants to drink. Gathered around the campfire, the squad notice the strange absence of mighty monsters on their journey. Jin closes his eyes and thinks that a wonderful glass of Radine would be just what is needed. The elderly gentleman agrees, enthusiastically saying that the complex flavors of the drink perfectly complement the meat. Hearing their conversation, Jin frowns at the name and decides that Een is probably red wine. Chris keeps marveling at how Jean can bake bread right in a pot. He explained that the pâté made from the liver of the Black Mountain goat was prepared in salted water, not milk. Jin thinks to himself that probably only he cares about healthy eating. Chris points to the homemade tent by the river and asks if that is their shelter for the night. Correcting her, Jin smiled and informed that he built a steam room. Chris just looked confused. He tells that during the hunt he crafted a dome from flexible branches and patches of fabric. Inside, Chris stood, puzzled by the neatly arranged pile of stones for the campfire. Jean shows how it works. He scoops water and pours it onto the hot stones. They hiss. A cloud of steam bursts from the stones, frightening, and at the same time impressing Chris with wide-open eyes. He explains the process, sweats in the sauna, and then jumps into the river to refresh himself. Looking at him with new admiration, Chris calls him by the nickname Twilight. She praises his unparalleled gift for making journeys cozy, a subtle but meaningful compliment. Jean offers his friend Chris to use the steam room he built himself. The rest of the group overheard, and their surprised faces caught Jean off guard. Feeling their burning gazes, he awkwardly extends the invitation to everyone. The whole company enthusiastically accepts his offer to go to the steam room. A large white bathing sheet hangs on a tree branch. Later that night, Jean hung the wet sheet and said they would have to sleep without a blanket. By the stream, a small shadowy creature suddenly disturbs the calm water. He stands on the shore and watches as numerous spirits gather in the moonlight. His thoughts return again to that disturbing sight, which he notices more and more often. The boy quietly admits that he wants to call the black spirits, but he is afraid that he will be seen. Morning light breaks through the dense forest canopy, announcing a new day. The entire expedition continues its path along the trail through the forest. Feeling fresh, Dean and Chris say with smiles how great they feel after the bath. Their cheerful step suddenly stops when Dean suddenly shouts for everyone to stop. Ahead emerges a lizard-like monster and he realizes, this is the three-horned variant. Let this creature be tenacious, let's all wait for Dean's command. Dean explains this lizard's skin is like armor, so the throat is the only truly vulnerable spot. The plan is ready. Dean orders Chris to split up, and she firmly replies that she is ready. Chris's boot presses into the grass as she takes a strategic position. She, becoming bait, successfully diverted all the attention of the large reptiles. Dean bursts in from the creature's flank, face pure concentration. His lightning strike on the monster's side perfectly distracts attention. While the lizard was distracted, Dean loudly calls Chris. It's a signal for the decisive attack. Chris rushes forward, her blade deeply cutting into the monster's exposed throat. Ash and Not enthusiastically praise Chris for her brilliant work, confirming her formidable reputation. It must be admitted, although everything was done flawlessly, the fierce battle left him shaken. Jean understands that their coordinated work is a skill that cannot be acquired just by watching. The fact that we came across a three-horned lizard so deep in the forest is undeniable proof. Listen, here monsters usually have no more than one horn and often none at all. The blow of realization, they ended up in this huge forest only for the weak shocks Jean. Dean, sighing with relief, declared that their main goal was finally accomplished. Let's outline their plan first to reach the next camp, and only then return to the city. Chris then asks Dean, will he help her disassemble the body of this creature? In the forest clearing, Jean watches as Let skillfully disassembles a large lizard. We lift our eyes from his work and enthusiastically praise Jean for his impressive skill in disassembling things. Jean accepts the compliment and, smiling, says that he trained to hunt in his own way. His thoughts darken when he notices many black spirits around. He wonders, do these dark spirits possess horned monsters and thus create them? Musa is already about to fry the lizard meat and asks Jean about their fat supplies. Jean confirms that they have plenty and decides to go gather wild asparagus. We warn him about hungry monsters. Jean gratefully accepts this. While searching, Jean comes across mushrooms and garlic mustard and immediately imagines future pasta. To make food gathering easier, he decides to activate his special search ability. He activates the skill, recalling that he had already used it when he was dealing with that lizard. His search confirms the suspicion. From the bushes peeks the same fox that he had glimpsed earlier. He recognizes it a fast monster with 2 horns, rushing straight towards their camp. Jean suddenly understood. It sees prey in the fire and he knows he must warn Let's. He rushes back to the camp and urgently shouts to his comrades that a fox monster is heading towards them. Let's calmly say that he has already masked their scent with cedar leaves. Then he hands Jean an ointment to hide his scent before they hide. From his hiding place, Jin froze in surprise the fox was running incredibly fast. The fox monster bursts into the clearing with stunning strength and speed. Let's, surprised by its sudden appearance, confidently says that he will defeat it. The monster ignores him, its gaze fixed on Jean, like a challenge to a one-on-one fight. He shouts, desperately trying to divert the monster's attention from his friend. With a determined look, Jin prepares to face the direct attack of the fox monster. The fierce fox now lies on the ground, whimpering and feeling dizzy. We froze in amazement and disbelief, unable to comprehend what had just happened to that creature. Jin proudly declares that he single-handedly defeated the 2-horned monster. Bright Chris approaches and calls Jean by her strange nickname Evening Twilight. She takes his hand and excitedly says that his legs are simply a wonder for a bronze-rank adventurer. Ash and his butler arrive and Ash sighs with relief Jin is safe. After the tense and unexpected encounter, silence fell for a moment. Let's look at the defeated fox, who is still amazed by Jean's incredible strength. He anxiously tells the group about this unexpected new threat. Let's explain why roaming fox monsters pose a greater danger than territorial lizards. With a serious expression, Ash warns his comrade about the looming threat over the city, the 3-horned monster. Jean feels the threat growing and notices a fox with 2 horns. Roger grimly decisively decided they must return to the city immediately the next morning. A large cauldron with meatballs bubbles cheerfully over the crackling campfire. Jean questions their prolonged bird hunting, but his companion insists it was insanely tasty. Another traveler, delighted with the pasta, remarked that food in the wilderness is much better than in the city. The sun brightly breaks through the lush canopy of forest trees. The group returns through the forest. The way home turned out quiet and uneventful. With faces clenched in determination, Ash and Roger lead the squad out of the forest. They arrived at the massive barred gates of the city. The expedition was over. Returning to the city, Jean sighs deeply with relief. Ash orders everyone to appear at the guild, and Jean is noticeably upset. He quietly asks Ash and Note to bring his reward later because he wants to go home. Ash anxiously suggested to Jean to visit him later and wash up. Roger asks Jean where he is rushing to. Having listened to the request, Roger agrees to talk with him about the spirits later. Jean approaches a large stone house with a wooden frame, his temporary residence. Completely exhausted, he throws firewood near the stove and sighs deeply. Tiny winged fiery spirits and a salamander flicker among the flames. He talks about his system. Fireplace spirits transmit messages between his houses. Using his ability to store, he seemingly magically hid some hot water as a reserve. He intends to warm the bath with his magic to use it later. With a slight flicker of energy, he teleports to his other home. He calls his little friend Risha, resembling a dog sleeping in a basket. Risha wakes up and happily jumps into Jean's arms as he greets his pet. He gently says to the creature, "First I need to wash and then we can play." Immersing himself in the hot water, Jean let out a long, satisfied sigh. Now clean, he understands that it took 3 washes to remove all the dirt. A fiery spirit appeared, and he thanks it for letting him know no guests came. He uses his ability to teleport again, striving to finish the preparations as quickly as possible. Noticing that the water in the bath is a bit warm, he decides to drain it and fill it with fresh water. As if by magic, he fills the bath again with fresh, steaming hot water. Opening the door, he sincerely apologizes to Ash and Not for making them wait. He extends a heavy pouch of money, as if announcing his share of the reward. Then Jean said that he had prepared a hot bath for both of them. Note, the butler addresses Ash as Ajusama and prepares to assist her. Later, the 3 of them relax, savoring toasts and a drink. Note, interested in the nice bathtub, asks Jin where he bought it. Jin admits that it is from the kingdom of Pester, a long and expensive journey. He thoughtfully thinks that his foreign utensils make people consider him from there. The note asks to buy the robes that Jean lent them, but Jean insists, just take them as a gift. The butler's face became serious when he spoke about their investigation in the forest. He announces a strike team is being formed and he and Ash will have to join it. Because of this exhausting, draining journey, Note insists they cannot accept the mantles for free. Jin tries to refuse payment, insisting that it is more than all right. The intimidating presence of banknotes forces the reluctant Jin to take the money. After the bath, Ash comes out and loudly says that she is finished. Jin offers to prepare another batch of hot water and brew tea for Ash. He politely declined her offer to help, citing the duties of a butler. Note apologizes and leaves, leaving Jean and Ash alone for a moment. Jean slid her a cup and smiled, "Make yourself at home, Ash." He froze in surprise, seeing her with her hair down for the first time. He was gripped by fear from her sudden deadly aura, and he cautiously asks what is wrong. The air darkened and became heavy, as if a premonition of inevitable trouble hung in it. She asks him if he has seen spirits in the forest, and he nods affirmatively. Ash recalls he hasn't seen such mutilated spirits since a mage rebelled. The memory reveals a desert landscape dotted with shadowy, distorted figures. Jean, never having seen magic, curiously asks if it is a rare ability. Ash says that spirits can be forced by contracts or destructive spells. He learns in horror that once a spirit's power is exhausted, the spirit itself disappears. She confirms this and adds, the black shadow proves that they have harbored resentment against humans. Jin asks if this means that mages will eventually become monsters too. A sinister smile appears on his face. He understands that his sister is becoming the ruler of demons. Ash explains with a spark in his voice, magic can bind spirits, making them permanent. Jin knows if you don't pressure the spirits too much, they will gladly help. She looks at Azu and says that the spirit chose to stay with her, rather than become black. It hurts Ash to compare faithful Azu with the corrupted black spirits. Jin notices that Ash is deeply shaken by the sight of the defiled spirits. He abruptly rose from the table, decided to act and help. He tells the puzzled Ash to wait a moment while he prepares something. Returning with a tray, he smiled warmly and thanked her for waiting. He extends a plate of sweets and asks her to keep it a secret from Noda. On the plate is a wonderful selection of pastries, cream puff, tart, and cake. Ash, with Azu on his shoulder, admits that he has never seen such sweets before. Jean says that he would very much like her to become his taster. He tells her that she shouldn't grieve so long over spirits. Ash sincerely thanks him for the food and prepares to take his first bite. She carefully brings a piece of the custard cake to her lips. When she tastes it, her face turns into genuine, rosy delight. They sit together and Jean asks if it is tasty, encouraging her to drink tea. She bites off a piece of cake, her cheeks puffed out as she chews. Her eyes widen in amazement and a happy blush blooms on her face. She enthusiastically says that everything is very delicious, especially the white cream, and immediately asks about the tart. Ash curiously asks about the red fruit, and Jean smiles and says that it is a strawberry. He feels guilty and worries that a young girl should not eat unfamiliar things. He asks if she likes sweets, admitting that it was his only way to comfort her. Ash calmly sips tea and her mood noticeably lifted. She admits that she is truly happy and is surprised herself at how easily she was pleased. She notices that her spirit companion Azu is also now significantly happier. With a gentle smile, she stroked the little bird, sharing its cheerful mood. Jin and Ash silently exchanged a knowing look across the table. The scene changes, and a voice is heard joyfully saying that she feels better. Before the eyes appears a large building with a wooden frame under a clear, cloudless sky. Jin meets Let's on the street. Let's had already heard that he was going to return to the forest. Let's ask Jin to make him a bag, and Jin willingly agrees to take measurements. Jin explains, after sewing bags for Dean and Chris, he needs more leather. Let's worry that such a high-quality bag might stand out and be stolen. While Jin carefully evaluates him, Let's tell all the details of the upcoming hunt. Jin is surprised after all. It seemed that adventure stars only happen from standard requests. Let me explain, stars are also given for work in the guild and for service to the community. He thoughtfully thinks that they are just small fish in the big picture of the world. The ranking system of adventures is clearly visible on the diagram, and Jin holds the bronze rank. Jin hears that bronze ranks can join the expedition, but decisively says he will not go. While he is being measured, he jokingly complains that it tickles, and Jin asks when he will leave. Jin says that his departure depends on some Amadio, and he himself even doubts that name. Let's reveal, Amadio is a golden rank adventurer, whom the guild covered by using its connections. He adds that Amadio is teaming up with a powerful mage, and this instantly sparks Jin's curiosity. Let's show the guild's confidence. They believe that Amadio will handle those few monsters expected. Changing the subject, Jin listens with a curious, questioning expression on his face. So we open, Amadio claims that he sees spirits, and this shocks Jin. Under the night sky, flickering sparks of light fill the crown of the demonic forest. Standing in the enchanted forest, Jin decisively decides to hunt monsters to obtain materials for bags. In the moonlit forest, a small shadowy black spirit flashed past him. He grabs the creature, it instantly hardens and turns into a ball, which he recognizes as Black 95. Releasing the spirit, he vows to name everyone he finds to calm Ash. Alone in the glowing forest, he prepares to take on his new mission. A new chapter begins when a voice calling Jin echoes on a city street. Jin meets with Ash and leaves a note, thanking them for waiting for him. He hands them new backpacks, saying he had to give these things away anyway. Ash complains about the tight deadline, not offers payment, but Jin postpones it. Jin smiles, his production skills made the task much easier than they thought. He clearly says, when the expedition starts, Amadio decides, so it's better to stock up in advance. He remembered how Let's warned dubious people might sneak into the expedition. Two rough, unkempt men press him, mock his appearance, and demand his money. Irritated by their demands, Jean pushes one of the thugs hard. Note worries and asks if Jean is okay, while a new voice mocks the bandit for choosing the wrong target. Chris enters with Dean and seeing the embarrassed Viking tells him, "Shut up." The traveler notes that those bandits were stupid to attack the black bear, and this confuses Jean. The notes say that everyone will celebrate their reunion at a restaurant, and this idea greatly pleases Chris. The group cheerfully raises their wooden mugs for a lively toast. Let's find out what everyone has been doing since their last investigation. Vakes explains that he helped Chris gather herbs while Dean was on the run. Jean asks Dean what it's like to be on the run and frankly admits that he himself left earlier, abandoning their request. Chris asks Dean if he is going to move from the place where he currently lives. Dean explains, now Mom is pulling the strings of his spoiled sister because he spoiled her. He realized that his sister should not rely on him while the guild is retraining her. Jean notices that the drama does not bother him at all. Ash is only thinking about bear hunting. Jean decides to change the subject and ask about something else. He awkwardly asks about the nickname Black Bear, because he does not understand at all what they were talking about. Note explains that people sometimes confuse Jean and Ash because both are very strong. Jean did not cheer up in his mind. He would rather be compared to a wolf, like Rish. Chris dramatically exclaims that a bear does not suit Jean's appearance at all, which resembles a rainbow. Vike slammed his mug, ready to make a passionate confession. He even exclaims that the true king of wolves is Bamori, and aspiring to a wolf nickname is pure madness. Jean asks who Bamori is, and Chris explains that he is a legendary traveler. The note states that the name Bamori is still well known, and Dean is his ardent fan. Vike sincerely says that he became an adventurer thanks to Bamori and amazing Jean. Jean again steers the conversation in another direction and is already ready to hand out his gifts. He hands over the bags he made for Chris, Dean, and Let's, and they accept them gratefully. Dean opens the bag and looks with surprise at what he found inside. He exclaims that there is leather inside too, and what an incredibly expensive thing it is. Note offers to pay, and Ash, as Jean says, suggests having a drink after the expedition. Dean jokingly says next time we'll order a whole cow, and Jean was quite taken aback. The group agreed, as soon as everyone returns safe and sound they will throw a party. Jean raises his mug and sincerely wishes everyone a safe journey on their expedition. Vikes and Chris said they were leaving, and Jean's group stayed to keep drinking. Let's tell Jean that he is renting a cheap room near the demon forest. He complains that the rent was raised because the landlord installed trendy new toilets. Jean feels uneasy from Let's stare and he sharply tells him, stop. The next day, Not thoughtfully noticed how they endured old smells, and Jean asked if they were merchants. A new day awakens. The sun slowly rises over the forest-covered mountains. Jean woke up, had breakfast, and decided to move deeper into the forest, using his ability to teleport. He swallowed the drink and thoughtfully considered his plan today to move deeper into the forest. In the forest, he prepares for another day he will catch and name the black spirits. He methodically names the spirits he meets, marking them as black. He sighs with relief as if he is finally beginning to understand this task. He eagerly awaits the passage of the expedition force. He really wants to see how his companion Imadeo will use magic. He asks several local spirits, resembling fairies, to keep him informed about the progress of the expedition. With a determined look, he decides to go a little deeper today. He glanced at the map and with a tremor noticed it ends right at the edge of God's influence. He steps into an unknown part of the forest, ready to explore. Boots crunch in the underbrush as he walks through the dense forest. Suddenly, from the bushes, a huge three-horned boar monster charged at him with a roar. He summons his mighty sword that destroys everything, and fiery energy wraps around his palm. With a sharp and powerful motion, he unleashed a devastating slashing strike. With a slight smile, he plans to later cook hot pot from the wild boar, using the supplies on the carcass. He notices interesting plants nearby. His attention instantly sharpens. He recognizes wild asparagus shoots in them and decides to take a few with him. He smiles, thinking that in the note he will share the asparagus with Popel. Kneeling down to gather the plants, he feels that someone is watching him. From among the trees emerges a majestic snow leopard with a unicorn horn and slowly approaches him. The majestic creature emits a low, guttural hiss. It holds a tattered piece of dark skin in its jaws. Jean shuddered and stood confused by the sudden appearance of the animal. He cautiously recognizes the creature as a snow leopard. The horned leopard sheds its skin and hisses at him again. He wonders, is this creature trying to convey something to him? Suddenly he realizes the animal is trying to say it has a request. Suddenly a majestic white deer appears and asks Jean to make a contract with someone named Maisel. Jean froze in amazement. Another talking beast appeared. He tries hard to understand the situation and cannot figure out why the leopard is holding its tail. He notices the horn and the absence of black shadows and assumes it might be a sacred animal. He asks who Maisel is and the deer simply replies, Maisel is their friend. Jin concludes that Maisel is about to turn into a black spirit. In return for his help, the deer offers to create a shelter for him. Jin insistently explained that this sanctuary repels monsters and black spirits. He thoughtfully considers the offer, realizing that a base in the forest will be very useful for summoning spirits. He agrees to help. They tell him to sit on the deer's back. Carefully sat on the back of the white deer and announced that he was already on it. The deer rushes forward at incredible speed, throwing him back against its antlers. He clung tightly and shouted to the deer not to rush forward while they galloped through the forest. The young man is harshly thrown to the ground, and he groans from nausea. Getting up in confusion, he complains about this sharp, shocking stop. Mao the snow leopard hissed, informing the person named Maisel of their arrival. A dark, distorted horse appears on the outcrop and looks at the person as if asking, "What are you doing here?" Rising to his feet, the young man recognizes the horse Maisel and the leopard Mao. He approaches, scrutinizing the ominous, shadowy flame on Maisel's shoulder. Announcing his intention to make a contract, he asks directly without any ceremony, "What is the horse's name?" A rule arises in his thoughts. A named spirit must voluntarily speak its name. Maisel snorts disdainfully, asking what fool would ever make a contract with a human. The horse compares this bond to a noose around the neck and declares that he will not take part in it. Instantly, in a lightning-fast move, the young man jumps onto the back of the stubborn horse. He aggressively calls the spirit a scoundrel and demands its name without fear. The deer and Mal note that his methods seem a bit excessive. Maisel wildly thrashes about, calling his rider a vile person. Pressing the struggling horse to the ground, he repeatedly asks its name again and again. The broken horse finally hoarsely utters its name, and the boy offers a deal. Between them in the air hung the idea of concluding a contract. His hand begins to softly glow as he prepares for the ritual. When the contract was completed, he sighed with relief. It seemed as if all the magic had left him. His animals tease him again about his overly grand plans for the shelter. He depicts his vision, a picturesque, easily accessible place for spirits with a spring. Mao orders him to set off together with the deer to the chosen place. Maisel, now purified, enthusiastically praises the person for their riding skills. He reluctantly mounted the deer again, hoping for a slightly more comfortable ride. Suddenly, the deer lunged forward and pushed him back with its antlers. The forest blurs into a smeared spot during their wildly fast journey. The ride suddenly ends. He is thrown to the ground again. Confused, he gets up and asks where they have arrived. He looked around in admiration. Before him stretched a beautiful grove with white-barked trees. With a grateful blush on his cheeks, he sincerely admits, this place is better than he had hoped. Two spirit animals loudly announced that they would now set up a sanctuary. Mao hissed, and a wave of magical energy rushed into the pond. Suddenly, a shimmering protective dome appeared over the entire clearing. He suddenly realizes with fear that the barrier will repel ordinary horses. The deer assures him any of the beasts he made a deal with can still enter. Seeing him off, the majestic animals warmly thank him for his help. In a dazzling flash of light, both spirit beasts disappeared completely. He stands alone in the now quiet, magical refuge that he has gained. He unfolded the map and was filled with surprise. A new place suddenly appeared on it. He does not hide his shock at the new addition since the last time he checked. Suddenly, he realizes that he can mark on the map places where ordinary gods do not reach. The opportunity to discover Japan as Flora did fills him with admiration. With a determined look, he decides to find out what to do next. A new chapter begins in the developed and bustling trading city of Naladade. He came to carefully examine the buildings and use them as a model. The island city is famous for its advanced technologies and incredible craftsmanship of artisans. He immediately admires the quality of the glass panes. Using his ability to evaluate, he begins to carefully analyze the construction. He notices the glass is so transparent, formed from interwoven circles. He recalls the thick green glass covered with bubbles that he saw in Kanemi. His attention is immediately drawn to the delicate engravings on the document box. The city's luxurious shops silently say, this is truly an advanced place. He was enchanted by the elegant red cup and decided to buy it. He says with regret that the purchases distracted him from architectural studies. Intrigued by the level of medicine in this world, he enters a pharmacy. His gaze freezes on a large open box of cocoa beans. The seller explains that these beans are ground, resulting in a bitter elixir. He learns nobles drink it with sweeteners, and because of this the price jumps. The sky-high price for the beans shocks him to the core. Despite the high price, he still decides to buy some for himself. His skill in appraisal clearly shows how much colossal work is invested in their preparation. He also buys other spices to compare them with those already in his pantry. He was walking and suddenly a voice called him from behind. A gray-haired gentleman smiled and remarked on how beautiful what he sees is. The young man tensed, wondering if that man was looking for a fight. The gentleman apologizes and asks where he bought his bag. He explains it is a new, comfortable design from the Azul region. The man notes that the Azul region is quite far. He emotionally recounts the exhausting journey through the snowy mountains. The gentleman thanks him for the information and says goodbye, walking away. For the 10th time today, he is asked about the bag. He recalls the terrifying incident in the bathroom with horror and sincerely hopes for better plumbing. After looking at the shop windows, he heads toward his main goal. He walks down a quiet alley, ready for the main event of the day. He enters a cluttered shop and the owner asks, "What are you looking for?" He asks for books about spirits and the seller freezes from this surprise. The blonde overheard and asked with interest if he was looking for a specific book. Young Ash noted that such a book would be a real rarity. He is convinced if it is found anywhere, everything will lose its power. Ash admits that he also snooped around gloomy antique shops in search of this item. The seller explains that such books are usually displayed as decorations for the nobility. The boy asks where one can find such gloomy bookstores. In the bookstore, the seller pushes books to him, some with content, others completely empty. The clerk clarified, empty books are merely disguised wooden boxes. He waved off the display copies and asked for real books. The clerk hands over a book. The pages are empty because the spirit made them unreadable. The clerk with a barely noticeable smile remarks, "The empty book, strangely enough, turns out to be more expensive." The young man's eyes narrowed. He asked to see the book touched by the spirit. Suddenly a tiny fairy appears and he wonders, does she constantly rewrite this text? When the clerk opened the book, the fairy gently fluttered out of the pages. The clerk explains that this script is special, only the author can read it. He thoughtfully realizes, mages usually hide their secrets under lock and key. To his surprise, he could read these symbols thanks to knowledge of the language. He begins to notice hints as if this is part of something bigger, closely connected. Seeing the magic circles, he asks with curiosity if there are more books with the same spine. The clerk smiles and says there are, but because of the illustrations they cost more. He thanks the seller. Leaving the shop, the mission succeeded. He understands that spirits guarded the original manuscript. Books are a true treasure. Here are history, herbs, and knowledge about spirits. Having spent all the money, he finally decides it's time to return home. In a cozy house, Jin, a young man, sits by the fireplace and reads. He thoughtfully looked at a book about the risks and benefits of deals with spirits. Jin remembered that spirits by contract make magic many times more effective and reliable. He feels how great a price in energy it costs to summon a spirit in a foreign, hostile environment. Suddenly he realizes, spirits are completely different, not the same. In his imagination, Mistu and Halalfa are two completely different spirits of light. His thoughts turn to another sphere of light. He considers it uncontrollable and dangerous. Jin concluded that spirits will avoid helping those who harm the environment. A new day unfolds under a clear, sunny sky. A luxurious hot breakfast was served. Juicy sausages, appetizing cutlets, and thin pancakes. A young blonde named Ash savors the dish with pure, blissful pleasure. Ash and his elderly butler enthusiastically praise the taste of the hot dish. Jin explained he invited them to finish the perishable products together before their trip. The note explains, in their world, hot breakfasts are a great rarity. Jin asks if they ever cook anything hot in the morning at all. The butler explains that people save on firewood by buying it at stalls. The empty bowl silently says that a very pleasant and hearty breakfast has ended. The guests were already about to leave, but Jin suddenly asked them to wait. Ash and Not look on with curiosity, wondering what he has in mind. He extends a large wrapped lunch so they can share it with their companions. With sincere gratitude, they both waved goodbye and set off on their way. Now all alone, Jin says he is going to stock up on building materials. He enters the building materials store, carefully examines the tiles and buys bricks. The seller helps him purchase various construction materials. Jin excitedly tells Rich, his companion who looks like a dog, about the new safe zone. Several small winged spirits, resembling dogs, playfully circle around Jin's feet. Holding Rich, he activates his teleportation ability and teleports them away. His boots softly landed on a grassy, sunlit forest clearing. He immediately flinched as the small, fluffy spirits scattered in panic. He asks aloud if Rich's presence caused their flight. Setting up a barrier, Jin smiled and told his companion that now it is safe to play. He announced that he was starting to arrange the plot, and immediately began pulling materials from his magical storage. Focused, he thrust the shovel into the ground to begin. In the clearing where the sun played in patches, the young man took up the shovel. He decided to build a two-story house. He imagines a simple plan, one room on each floor, perfect for tea and relaxation. Petting his companion, he dreams of a large yard so they could be together while he calls the spirits. After several days of intense gathering of plaster, wood, and bricks, he finally feels completely ready to start construction. Having worked hard, he leaned on the shovel, sighed deeply from fatigue, and decided to go for lunch. He calls his little dog friend Rich, and he trots over to join him. With pricked ears, Rich greedily licks the water from the bowl placed for him. A thick bagel sandwich, generously filled with meat and fresh greens, lies on a piece of parchment ready. The young man enjoys a quiet meal at a small table, while Rich rests at his feet. After drinking, Rich notices a small stick on the ground and examines it with lively curiosity. He happily chews the stick, rolls onto his back in the grass and glows with pure delight. Looking at his favorite pet, the man dreams of planting a bunch of different plants and buying a coffee siphon. A sudden hissing made him flinch. He noticed a majestic horned snow leopard emerging from the trees. His surprise grows as a graceful white deer with large antlers appears right behind the leopard. Then a mighty black horse steps onto the clearing, completing the trio of unexpected guests. Three creatures do not pay attention to him. They look only at Riesh, who is tearing out a defensive hiss from himself. Confusion reigned in the snow leopard's head. He does not understand why the revered Riesha-sama is here. Completely puzzled by the reverent tone of the animal, the young man asks what is happening. The majestic spirit animals stand before Riesh, and the horse asks why Riesh-sama is here. The young man repeats the respectful address Riesha-sama, and now he has even more questions in his head. The deer and the snow leopard spoke. It turned out that Riesh disappeared 5 years ago after an unsuccessful attempt to summon the hero. Putting his hand on his chin, the young man listens carefully and contemplates this new information. He turns to his favorite and asks if he was ever the lord of these mighty beings. Riesh simply tilts his head, his gaze empty and inquisitive, and the stick is still in his mouth. The man looks into Riesh's eyes and thinks, either he does not remember or does not want to recall, or he simply does not care. He was struck by the realization he shockingly learned that they even knew each other. Looking at the sparkling, magical glade, he wondered if this was Riesh's former home. He concludes that the wolf feels more natural at home in the forest. The animal begins to boast, hissing that Riesha-sama is stronger than any other spirit. Someone else adds that Reach is also freer than any other spirit that exists. Praise continuously say that his powerful voice will reach every corner of the world. When the snow leopard purrs with admiration, Riley notices that he must be a huge fan. The deer tells how Rish defended the forest from the apostles of the wind, and the man firmly decides to keep working. The young man asks about the apostles of the wind, but the horned snow leopard only hisses. The animal spirits looked at Rish with adoration, who was chewing a stick, and they called him majestic. One spirit whispered that all traces of Reach disappeared about a year ago. Jean suddenly realized it was then that he brought Rish to his magically isolated house. He cannot get rid of the thought, is the strange geography here because Rish saved this forest? Returning to the spirits, he asks again who these apostles of the wind are. The deer confesses that he was the previous hero, and the snow leopard could not hold back tears. In horror, Jin asks himself whether all the heroes of the past were terrible people. The spirits whisper the hero's plan is to tame the forest and build boats. He realizes that they mean boats, and he is pierced by sharp guilt for his own actions. He fears that Rich will now hate him for having done the same. He sat down depressed and suddenly met Rishi's innocent, curious gaze. Calmed, he gently scratches Rishi's belly while the little creature playfully rolls over. The animal spirits sadly say that the western forests have not recovered from the destruction caused by the hero. Jin reflects on how human settlements are forced to bite off pieces of nature to grow. He clearly understands that beyond the cities hides a dangerous world of spirits and beasts. He thinks about how people short-sightedly cut down forests, not understanding the dangers that will come later. The horse tells how the magic of the current hero has defiled his once pure white body. It is sincerely grateful for being spared from grief. It did not have to eat its own. Other spirits remind the horse that they were the ones who initiated this agreement on the lands of Risha. Suddenly, a female voice emerges in memory. It warns of some treachery in the world. She explains that even spirits devour others and warns him to stay away from powerful heroes. The Jinn convinces himself that he will never approach them. Determination in him becomes like steel. He does not regret but knows he must become stronger. It dawns on him that the divine gifts of craft are not enough. He will have to learn to fight. He asks another spirit, did Rich lose his memory along with his power? Glancing at the map, he guesses that Risha no longer has much influence over these forests. The horse and the snow leopard begin to share what they know about reachability. The deer loudly declares that Risha-sama is greater, braver, and wiser than any other spirit. Overwhelmed by their flattery, Jean begs them to stop. The scene shifts to the view of one of his magnificent multi-story buildings. Jin sits before a delicious dish, hands folded in sincere gratitude. Taking a big bite of noodles, he enjoys its taste and exclaims, "Delicious." Jin eats contentedly and dreams to start a farm and make new vegetables common for everyone. While eating, Jin reflects on the idea of growing crops with the help of local spirits. He dreams that someday his unique ingredients will adorn the plates of exquisite restaurants. Filled with gratitude for the training, he resolutely sets out to realize his grand plans. The moon hangs over the quiet mountain landscape, promising a peaceful night. Under the stars, he begins to build, breaking stones with a heavy sledgehammer. He also cares for the earth, kneeling down and preparing the dark soil for planting. In the magical forest, he gently invites a small shadow spirit to sit on his finger. Walking through his newly sown field, he smiles thoughtfully, thinking about how much he has achieved. He, with a satisfied smile mentally, counts new cultures and rejoices in his work. His thoughts fly to friends on the expedition, and for now he is not worried at all. He calls his comrade Riesh, inviting him to play with a toy made of rope. Jean cheerfully throws the toy, and Reach rushes after it with full enthusiasm. Riesh proudly returns with the toy. Jean smiles and says, "Well done." Petting his companion, he catches himself thinking whether to ask Denoso to make a frisbee. He announces that the games are over today. He has a new project he wants to try. On his writing desk are laid out the tools of wizardry. Everything is ready for action. Leaning over the parchment, he says with passion that he wants to create magical circles. He carefully prepares special ink, mixing ingredients with his magic. Holding a compass in his hand, he prepares for the delicate and precise work ahead. He carefully applies the freshly prepared enchanted ink to the tip of the compass. With a steady hand, he begins to trace complex, intricate figures from his book. He gathers his thoughts, knowing he must combine these figures with other magical symbols. He holds his breath for a moment, choosing which spirit to summon. His imagination conjures a gelatinous water spirit and a winged earth fairy. Suddenly, a fiery salamander appears in his mind, another option for summoning. He becomes confused and scolds the spirits for appearing before he finished. He drives away the chaotic elementals, fearing they will ruin the delicate parchment. Under the pressure of the commotion, he freezes, unsure of what step to take next. Just as he thought to call the ice spirit, a new idea suddenly struck him. His thoughts are abruptly interrupted when Rish playfully jumps into his arms and licks him. Suddenly he realized Rish has his own elements, ice and darkness. He imagines how someday he will make ice cream if only Rich could cool everything down. Nodding his head, he gathered himself and decided, it's time to take up drawing again. The field is already sown, and he sincerely sends wishes for a bountiful harvest this season. He solemnly announced his final decision to draw the symbol of fertility and infuse it with his magic. The ready magic circle shone with dazzling light as he poured his power into it. The incantation ended. A large plume of smoke burst from the parchment. He watches in shock as an old woman in a hood materializes before him. Around the newly summoned spirit, magical sparks of light flicker in the air. She smiles, and he understands that before him is the spirit of a bountiful harvest. He mumbles that although he understands a little, this situation still throws him off balance. Thoughts rush through his mind. Is this a joke, or did he really manage to summon it? With bitterness, he concluded that the magical inks he had so carefully made were probably bad. Suddenly, a hand appears behind his back and points at his magical work. There he appears, calmly gazing at the parchment glowing on the table before him. He gently places his palm on the magic circle. Jean looks surprised as the delicate drawing suddenly disappears completely from the paper. Rudiel and Kato corrected him, explaining that this book is for the spirits nearby with whom a contract has been made. In the quiet room above them, a light, smiling laugh sounded. The goddess Gal Alpha easily descends downstairs, telling Jean that he looks as if he is having fun. She shines with a smile and adds that it brings her great joy to watch him. Jin raised his hands up, irritated by their sudden and unannounced arrival. Hal Alpha places a hand on his shoulder, noticing the exquisite alcoholic drinks he has gathered. She explains that it is these fleeting spirits that make the home so cozy. The entire group of gods is now gathered around his work desk. Ish asks why Jin bothers with books if he can just ask them directly. Inside Jin, shame corrodes when he remembers how they abandoned him to his fate. Van suggests arranging a sparring match to chase away the boredom from just sitting. The scene shifts to a clearing deep in the forest, lit by patches of sunlight. Vaughn and Jean stand opposite each other, swords drawn, ready to begin the duel. They lunged forward, their blades clashing in a powerful, instantaneous strike. With a determined expression, Jin puts all his strength into the clash. He charged forward with a shout, putting all his power into the attack. Vaughn easily parries the strike, and the steel rings out with a sharp, loud clang. The parry strike of such force pushes Jin back. He stumbles and falls to the ground. Vaughn looks down at him and sharply says that Jean is moving incorrectly. Still lying on the ground, confused, Jin asks distrustfully what he meant by that assessment. In flashes of the past, Jin suddenly realized he was merely imitating others' styles. He remembers how, striving to become stronger, he peaked and copied various combat techniques. Vaughn tells him in detail that his movements are uncontrolled and a complete mess. Jin reluctantly agrees that the assessment is correct. He knows he hasn't adjusted his movements. Von Zeiss asks Jean to imagine the true and intended shape of his sword. Jin closed his eyes and thoughtfully considered his visualization. Images flicker in his head, sometimes fantasy heroes, sometimes samurai from historical dramas. He could not deny it, historical dramas affected him much more strongly. He looks at his elaborately decorated sword and thinks that it is more like a sword from a role-playing game. Suddenly, an important realization dawns on him. The sword itself is fundamentally different. Vaughn holds the sword. It begins to dissolve into shimmering particles of light. Jin froze in disbelief. His sword miraculously began to transform. He watches as the blade, All-Kill, begins to take a completely different form. His eyes widen. He recognizes the shape of the new weapon emerging. He exclaims in astonishment, it has become a Japanese katana. The new weapon flies into his hands and hovers there, shimmering with a faint magical light. He notices fantasy changes instead of fabric. A silver chain shines there. Grasping the hilt, he proudly says that this is a sword from his homeland. He prepares to draw the blade. A pleasant, ringing click is heard. He takes a ready stance. The katana is raised horizontally right in front of him. With a quick and smooth motion, he draws the blade, fully ready for battle. Vaughn asks if he is ready for another round of their sparring. Jin's face lights up with enthusiasm, and he eagerly accepts the challenge. Their second duel begins with a sharp and instant clash of steel blades. Vaughn skillfully parries Jin's attack. Their movements become one dynamic blur. Jin finds it much easier to move with the katana. He truly enjoys the fight. Vaughn praised Jin's progress, and at these words, a bright joy shone on Jin's face. He realizes that the all-killing blade cannot harm its own creator. His face is serious. He thoughtfully contemplates the incredible power of his mentor. He feels that Vaughn's advice allowed him to fight without any hesitation. Rich joyfully jumps up and gently licks his cheek. Suddenly, the goddesses Mistu and Halalfa appear, sincerely congratulating him on his hard work. The two goddesses jokingly tease him, laughing at the fact that he found himself surrounded by so many beauties. Holding his little companion in his arms, Jin realizes that the book is based on false assumptions. He was given a new mission to visit the temple in Thelmist within 7 days. The young man learns Stelmist, an island south of the Kaval Peninsula. The female figure promises to prepare a more accurate book, and he gratefully agrees. He sighs heavily. To buy that book, he will have to earn money. An old woman in a hood appeared and, with surprise in her eyes, looked over the incredible amount of crops he had sown. The rows of magical plants barely flickers in the loosened soil of his new garden. The boy and the old woman offer to help harvest. In return, they ask only for a little food. The Jinn, confused, cannot understand why spirits need to eat at all. They explain that they can taste everything that seems interesting to them, for example, his unusual plants. He realizes that their tastes have now grown from simple products to the harvest of his garden. In search of money, he finds himself in the bustling trading city of Naladade. Above one of the numerous establishments in the city hangs a luxurious, decorated sign. He enjoys a meal in an open-air restaurant, admiring the view of the sea. Tasting truffle pasta, he marvels at the variety of delicacies in this city. He smiled as he remembered how successfully he sold the fox's skin and horns for a high price. Now that his money is safe, he calmly continues to enjoy every bite of the delicious dish. He wanted to find a training saber similar to his sword All-Kill. The seller greeted him warmly and winked, saying that rare spirit weapons are also sold here. He learns that these are either weapons possessed by spirits or the spirits themselves transforming into weapons. The new information makes him realize that his own ruthless blade is a spirit weapon. The seller advises keeping them in places loved by spirits, and this advice makes him reconsider his storage method. Having gained valuable insight, he thanks the shopkeeper and sets off. That evening he returns home, preparing for his nightly ritual. On his table stands a prepared bowl of water for the clairvoyance spell. Standing before the bowl, he prepared to glimpse distant events. His reflection distorts as the magic of divination swirls in the water. The image clears, and before him emerges the expedition team, part of his daily check. While sipping tea, he recognizes this group, a golden-ranked team led by Amadeo. He confesses he asks for help from local spirits to see more clearly. While he snacks, his gaze falls on Amadeo, as they said, surrounded by women. His sharpened senses suggest that all three adventurers are accompanied by spirits. He recognizes the mage's companion in a robe, a spirit of light. The archer's bow, wrapped in vines, reveals her as a user of spirit weapons. Finally, with a stone face, he dryly says that Amadeo's familiar is a prairie dog. His divination briefly showed the creature's rear that was moving, and he found it quite cute. He decides to visit to see how things are progressing with Esha and his other friends. The magical vision showed Esha's squad. Yes, they are still moving as a group of 5. He recognizes among them Aza, the spirit of Dean, and the one obsessed with chins. He recalls, for their safety, he left one of his spirits nearby. To his horror, he sees his fairy-like spirit gently stroking Letz's beard. He worries that his spirit might develop strange habits, and all this will happen without Letz's knowledge. Changing the subject, he asks with interest how the gold-ranked team is doing. Divination shows that they are currently fighting a large lizard. With one powerful swing, Amadeo cuts the huge lizard in half. The sorceress in a cloak and her elf-like spirit watch the display of power. The split lizard monster lies defeated on the mossy forest floor. Jin is stunned. Could this incredible power be from their spirits? His attention was drawn to a solitary figure, and an unpleasant anxiety seized him from it. Tension hangs in the air as the scene shifts to this new, ominous figure. The man in armor quietly sneaks up on the archer, his hand gripping the sword hilt tightly. Hearing a sound, the archer suddenly turns just at the moment he lowers his sword. The air blurred from the movement, a sudden and brutal clash erupts. The archer dodges the attack and quickly plunges a dagger into the attacker's side. He is struck by her skill. She is not called golden rank for nothing. The man in armor stumbles and falls back, clutching the wound in his side. A grotesque black spirit begins to emerge from the wound on his chest. The possessed man collapses to the ground as the spirit fully breaks free. The expelled spirit immediately lunges at the archer to possess a new body. Yet it is fiercely repelled by an invisible force surrounding the archer. The spirit rushes back, possessing the body of its previous, now unconscious host again. Jin deeply ponders why the first possession happened. He knows spirits need a host. He anxiously wonders what the archer will do now to tame the black spirit. Looking at her, a terrible thought begins to grow in his mind. He asks himself how it is even possible to defeat a spirit that has possessed a person. He knows that the spirit's weapon could work, but not when its bearer is a human. The archer draws her bow wrapped in spirit, her face stern and unwavering. He watches in horror as she aims at the leader and understands her cruel intent. A shocking scene reflects in his eye. Black blood spurts from the wound. The memory of the execution makes him tremble. Death was so close. He slaps himself in the face to break free from that twisted spiral of thoughts. He took a deep breath and managed to gather himself at least a little. He recalls wounding the bearer is a known way to strike the spirit as well. He does not understand why she did not attack the spirit when it became vulnerable for a moment. In his imagination flashed again. Another traveler, a comrade, rushed to the fallen. The man pressed the dead comrade to his chest, his face a mask of grief and horror. The genie, with sadness in his eyes, understands that the man was his friend. From the chest of the grieving man, a black spirit begins to emerge. The spirit is now trying to possess the second man, seeking a new master. The archer and the recently struck man stand stunned. He suddenly collapsed, and they do not understand why. He is categorically sure the archer does not see black spirits. He thinks that the ability to see spirits can manifest differently. Maybe they are visible only as a blurred outline, or only certain types or levels of spirit power are noticeable. He realizes that this is the first time he sees a spirit actively possessing someone. He assumes that this bulge is a sign that the possession has just begun. He wondered, do the other two members of the golden rank party see them? He remembers, for example, he said that it is hard to notice when a spirit takes over someone. He thinks that if they saw it, the man would have been immediately isolated. At first, he does not feel any obligation to take on this problem. He has already learned so much. But as soon as the thought flashed through his mind that Ash and his other friends were nearby, he changed his mind. For the safety of his friend, he decisively says that he has already decided. Returning to his room, he calls for the help of his spirits of light and shadow. He orders them to hide his face in the shadows and lift him above the ground. He adds the final instruction: the cloak must not rise along with his body. He transformed a mysterious hooded figure silently hovers in the room. He, with a determined smile, announced that it was time to set off. At the scene, Amadeo loudly demands to know what just happened between his companions. The archer, confused, says that the companions suddenly just collapsed without any warning. The voice of the mysterious figure cut through their confusion and instantly drew attention. The travelers sharply turned around, frightened by his sudden and silent appearance. Hidden under a dark hood, Jin was confident no one would recognize him anyway. His confidence shatters into pieces when he notices Ash and others among the spectators. Surrounded by flickering sparks of light, he quietly asks the spirits to change his voice. He addresses the possessed man, saying he has come for the creature hiding within him. The suffering man stammers in confusion as a cloaked figure approaches and extends a hand. To his own surprise, the hand of the mysterious figure cannot pass through his chest. Jin brushed off the strange feeling, stubbornly convincing himself that he was just imagining it. With a quick, decisive movement, he tears the shadow creature from the man's body. Nearby, an adventurer shouted, recognizing the writhing creature, a black spirit. The long-haired traveler recalled that the possessed man had behaved strangely before fainting. The woman in the hood realizes with horror that the man must have been possessed. Now freed, the man looks around confusedly, while Jean silently watches him. Suddenly, Jean notices another victim and realizes the archer's target is still alive. He kneels beside the badly wounded man, his face calm amid the soft light slowly drifting around. Pressing his hands to the wound, he awakens his powerful healing force. The wounded man emits a painful groan, his face contorted as the magic begins to work. His eyes barely open, he slowly regains consciousness after the miraculous healing. The blonde companion looks on, unbelieving, and exclaims, "He has already woken up." The whole group froze as the healed man stood up and shouted that this was a miracle. Under the shadow of the hood, Jean allows himself a quiet, relieved smile at his success. One of the adventurers whispered in disbelief, unable to comprehend this impossible recovery. The hooded woman approached Jean closely, her gaze burning. She demanded to know who he really was. Her sharp gaze fell on the flickering lights around him. Were those really his spirits? He cannot shake the thought of how strange contracts with spirits seem and how much they help today. The Jin finally becomes convinced this woman truly sees the spirits surrounding him. The woman admits that she does not know where the spirit he just pulled out comes from. She sternly warned him and strongly advised to watch the first bearer closely. The Jin turns and sees that Ash is looking at him with a creepy piercing gaze. Frightened by Ash's piercing gaze, he knows he must leave immediately before he is recognized. Another adventurer shouts to him, "Wait," but he is already running away. Activating the teleportation skill, his body scattered into particles of light. He completely disappears, leaving behind only shimmering specks of light and a quiet, barely audible sound. Appearing in another place, he holds the captured black spirit in his hands and feels as if everything is settled. He notices that this is the largest black spirit he has ever seen and decides to make a contract with it. He recalls the great possessed horse, which, although distorted, still holds a shred of self-control. The diagram shows how black spirits devour others to fill their own missing parts. The scene changes abruptly. The panel fills with hissing and white noise as if a hint that time or thoughts have just jumped. The text says that the contract or the master can appease the insatiable hunger of the black spirit. He reflects on how he constantly prevents his spirits, with whom he made a contract, from devouring each other. A tiny spirit like a little bat cheerfully flutters its wings as he prepares to return home. Under the starry sky, he finally decides that it is time to go back home. At home, his companion spirits sincerely thank him for the help and ask him to disperse them. Alone, he silently asks himself what has happened in the world during the time he was away. Holding the seer's cup, he gazes into the swirling water to see distant events. He sees how the adventurers he saved have now fallen prostrate before the archer who attacked them. He smirks, enjoying the fact that they bow to the same person who almost killed their comrade. He justifies to himself, the group of the possessed was the first to attack the archer. He is going to ask Ash and the others to tell the whole story as soon as they return to Canaan. The scene shifts to another time outside a sturdy stone house. A young man named Denoso shouts in panic, "What is happening to me?" Jin decisively tells Denoso to be silent and take off his clothes, completely ignoring his protests. Two boys peek from behind the corner and shyly ask if they can join the fun. Jin reluctantly agrees and asks the boys to help him with this task. The two boys shine with mischievous joy, which fills Denoso with complete horror. Denoso's clothes were torn off to a triumphant sound. A woman named Shiva receives the clothes and notices with surprise. The quality turned out to be remarkably good. She energetically lists the tasks for the day, and Jean orders her to make Denoso also get himself in order. The shirtless dinosaur loudly complains that everyone attacked him first thing in the morning. Shiva winks and smiles, saying she won't let him go until he washes himself by the well. Jin waves goodbye, leaving Denoso to fate, while Shiva drags him away. He loudly declares that today he is in the Denoso house with a certain purpose. Studying the local construction, he suddenly realized how dirty and unhygienic everything was there. He glances at the raised steps on the threshold, a usual trick to keep street dirt out. His face twisted with disgust at the thought that he would have to clean horse manure from the streets. He notices that the Denoso family's bedding is modest, simple fabric on a straw mattress. Leaning on a broom, he thought that he wanted to help his friends stay clean. He sweeps the stone path, believing that the Denosos are the tidiest farmers in the district. The sun sets behind the trees, and the long hard day finally comes to an end. Denoso stands in his shining clean house and cannot believe his eyes. Is Jean some kind of cleaning miracle? Jean accepted the praise with a smile and said that now only the shutters remain to be fixed. He promises to fix them tomorrow and invites the family for tea. Shiva sends the children to bring a quail and a few eggs for their lunch. The children cheerfully agree, raising their hands in excitement. Denoso asks why Jean cleans if he doesn't like it, and Jean quietly confirms he really doesn't like it. He explains that he acted on impulse, he simply cannot tolerate dirty places. Shiva briefly and simply explained to Denoso, Jean just likes everything to be clean. She serves a luxurious dish, baked quail in a rich sauce. Jin looks with admiration at Shiva's signature dish, a pot of pho with quails and leeks. The description says the dish is filled with the aroma of a sweet, partially fermented liqueur. Using his skill to evaluate, Jean happily notices how well the leeks absorb the flavor. Smiling warmly, Shiva invites everyone to start eating. The family and Jean thank for the meal, a true picture of warm home comfort. Jin thoughtfully reflects. The Denoso family is his ideal and he hopes to have the same one day. A wistful thought crossed his mind to help his own family find such warmth. He instantly dismissed this idea as ridiculous and indifferently returned to his food. The scene changes. We find ourselves in the coastal town of Telmist, where stone houses nestle right by the sea. Jean decides to first visit the temple, and then to look for the city's famous lace and silverware. He asks aloud where he can find the temple dedicated to the goddess Rudiel. Against the clear sky rises the majestic stone facade of the temple. Inside, he is greeted by an old priest with a white beard. The priest confirms someone told him to wait for Jean's arrival. With closed eyes, the priest quietly said what he sees, and Jean also received a prophecy. Jin looks confused with a puzzled expression, as if questioning the prophecy itself. He recalls how Rudiel spoke to him directly and cannot understand if that already counts as a prophecy. In the memory appeared the moment when the goddess Rudiel handed him a book. Jin, a little downcast, tells the priest that in some ways he is right. The priest, satisfied, gestures for Jin to follow him deeper into the temple. Their footsteps echo loudly on the stone floor as they walk down the long corridor. Jin raises his head, and a quiet, silent surprise appears on his face at the moment they stop. The priest turns with a serious expression and warns him, "Say not a word about what you will see next." The scene opens on an empty white transition panel. The young man with dark, tousled hair gives his serious promise. The old priest slowly turns to the stone wall, ready to move forward. His hand touches the wall and a hidden magical mechanism comes to life. Next to the large stone statue, a secret passage opens with a rumble. A trembling flicker of a single candle breaks through the darkness. A small figure in a robe appears, face hidden in shadow. Jin gasps at the unexpected appearance. He is stunned to notice how much the figure resembles someone named Rudiel. The young man froze, looking puzzled at the mysterious figure in the robe. The figure turned to him with a calm, unwavering expression. He decides to approach closer and look carefully to understand what is happening. He stares so intently that in the candlelight he notices something quite unusual. He suddenly realizes the light is not fire but only a clever illusion of small spirits. This leads him to conclude that figure must be a powerful spirit. The spirit turns and silently begins to walk away. Jin paused for a moment should he follow them. He steps along a long stone corridor filled with magical light. The prospect of exploring a secret corner fills him with excitement. The passage leads to an endless library where the shelves are incredibly tall, as if reaching to the very sky. His spirit guide accurately guesses he is looking for books about summoning. Jin confirms this and does not hide his interest in the history of the library. The spirit summons a book from the high shelf with a simple gesture. An ancient tome, seemingly forgotten by time, is handed to Jin. His guide explains that this book will help him navigate the collection. Later, they found themselves in a simple room in the library. The room is almost empty, it contains only a cabinet and a writing desk. The spirit patiently waits while Jin prepares to begin his research. Before opening the book, he asks if the tour is already over. The pages rustle as he begins to read the history of the library. The book vividly tells how Rudiel saved the collection from destruction. Jin realizes the guardian of the spirits must be connected to Rudiel. He sits at the desk, fully immersed in the ancient text. The spirit anticipates his next question and offers another book. The Jin aloud wonders, what powers do the people of love possess? The spirit hands him a book about a story of love. He gratefully takes the book, surprised at how helpful the spirit turned out to be. He immerses himself in reading about the history of Locke. The book opens with a bright illustration of the founder of the nation Boss. He learns that love is a mighty nation protected by spirits. Their downfall forced the survivors to crown a new queen. Jen learns that the true kingdom of Locke and its royal dynasty have fallen. He closes the book after finishing the tragic story. The text clearly shows that these two groups of lovers are completely different. He assumes that a secret society stands behind those past events. He sincerely appreciates this library and will definitely return. The scene moves outside. In front of us is a large stone building. Jin is sitting outside reading when suddenly he hears that sound. He raises his head, surprised to see a familiar person. The blonde youth Ash, frowning, shouts his name. Jin is puzzled. Ash looks exhausted from the journey. He notices Ash's wet hair and asks if he has been swimming. A tiny bird sits on Ash's shoulder, also wet and sad. Jin offers to boil some water to take a proper bath. Ash explains that he was so dirty he was ashamed even to ask. Jin smiles, understanding Ash's special nature. He sympathizes, remembering how dirty it can be on expeditions. Asha asks where his butler is. Jin suggests making tea while the water in the bath boils. He pours steaming tea from a white teapot into a cup. He hands Asha the tea and a basket of bread. Asha shyly asks him to keep his distance because he is afraid he smells. Jin agrees and suddenly remembers that he has something for him. Asha hands over a small cloth bundle as a gift. Jin takes the pouch with interest and asks what is inside. Asha reveals that it is magical iron for forging a stronger sword. Jin gladly accepts the valuable and expensive gift. Then Asha asks Jin how he was in the forest. Jin chokes on his tea from Asha's stunning revelation. Panic grips him. Did Ash see his face through the cloak? Ash painfully recalls the kindness of the man in the robe and his spirit companions. The Jin sighed with relief. Ash noticed only his kindness. Ash noticed that figure had no distinct magical element. The Jin understands that the spirit successfully concealed his identity. Ash's story suddenly darkens. It includes a mention of a possessed man. The Jin learns that neither Ash nor Naka could see that black spirit. In the memory appear the possessed man and the sorceress of the golden rank. The Jin wonders how it could have happened so easily. Ash explains, most likely the war in Chaldea is to blame. Due to the conflict and the use of magic, many black spirits appeared. The Jin asks if they did not expect side effects from them. He looks with disgust and thinks, could the leaders of Chaldea be idiots? Ash grimly predicted that Chaldea would have a poor harvest this year. Ash reveals the shocking truth. The sorceress Rosa is searching for a descendant of love. The scene changes. We find ourselves in a house, and the butler brings firewood. The butler compliments the modern and luxurious amenities of the genies. The genie looks admiringly at a piece of soap that smells fresh and plans to bake. He hesitates to bake a meat pie or cassella pancakes. A scene emerges in memory. The butler and the sorceress whisper about love. The butler, with an anxious tone, suggests that the kingdom wants to use love as a countermeasure. He considers their meeting with Jean a real stroke of luck. The genie decisively rejected their theory and decided to stay away from the guild. The butler agreed because he was afraid he would have to awkwardly ask Ash for help. Jin believes that Ash will rescue him and help avoid this difficult situation. For a moment he considered revealing the truth, but it seemed too troublesome to him. He focuses his attention on baking. Jin carefully folds the fluffy meringue into the dough. The tiny spirit fairy magically stirs the batter in the pan. He gently places the pan into the hot oven and watches to ensure it cooks slowly. Ash peeks into the kitchen. The sweet aroma irresistibly draws him in. Ash blushes slightly on his cheeks and asks with curiosity what Jin is doing. Standing by the brick oven, Jin smiles and says he is making cassella pancakes and a meat pie. Ash's eyes shine with genuine joy. He couldn't wait to try the cassella pancakes. The scene shifts. Outside before us is a sturdy stone building with a wooden frame. Jin proudly shows the freshly baked luxurious meat pie and golden pancake. And Ash and the butler note are looking at that beautiful food, their eyes wide open with admiration. Gently biting, Ash, surrounded by roses, exclaimed that the food was simply incredibly delicious. The group of adventurers raised their wooden mugs and together solemnly proposed a toast. A giant banquet was spread on the table, and the team, tired after the expedition, gathered for lunch. The travelers sit around the large wooden table and begin to eat together. A stocky man named Vikes loudly says, "With good beef you can never go wrong." Chris and Let's express their joy at the freshly grilled meat after the exhausting journey. Jin, with a cheerful smile, notices that his comrades have ordered a bunch of meat again. Ash thoughtfully asks himself if the tavern serves meat pies, as thoughts about Jean still linger in his mind. Vikes recalls with horror how during the expedition they encountered a dangerous demonic wolf. In the illustration, the sinister wolf explains that in the eyes of demonic monsters reigns a dark mist. He warns if the hay scatters, the monster will turn into an even stronger demon. Chris assumes that the guild anticipated everything, sent 3 adventurers of the golden rank. Jean could not believe the sorceress Rosa also has a golden rank. Chris looks at Jean with a knowing smile, and this expression confuses Jean. He jokingly teases O Evening Twilight, calling him a beast because of his appetite. Let's link the appearance of monsters with excessive use of magic in Chaldea and during the summoning of heroes. Suddenly, a grim truth occurred to Jean. It seems the arrival of a hero brings war. Let's reveal the traveler Amadeo is planning a new great expedition. He asks the butler Note whether Amadeo invited him to join the ranks. Note explains that he refused the offer because their characters simply did not get along with Amadeo. Chris poses seductively and with a smile says he could not refuse the beauty's request. Then Let's ask Ash. He quietly says that he also refused the invitation. Note lightly knowingly nods and watches their conversation. Jean asks Ash for a favor, and Ash instantly agrees without hesitation. Let's stay with this disappointment and admit he wasn't even invited to join. Jean calms him down. Apparently, those recruiters just don't know how to recognize people. He says this very seriously. Amadeo chooses only those adventurers who have spirits. We are worried that the expedition will turn into chaos because of the accomplices Amadeo chose. Looking at the food, a sense of duty prevails, and he decides to go anyway. Jean and Ash wish him safety, and he amusingly asks for at least a little sympathy. Chris asks Jean to join, but he categorically refuses. He doesn't want to sleep outdoors. Let's spread this news. Jean's custom bags have conquered the gold party. A bright, pleading smile blooms on Jean's face as he sincerely thanks. He announces that he is leaving the meeting and walks outside, leaving the building. At the city department, Jean approaches the clerk and sincerely, hopefully asks about houses for sale in his neighborhood. He says that he is rummaging behind the fox where he and Ash live. The clerk confirms that he is a tenant and says that he is inspecting the area. Smiling, the employee asks him to wait a minute while she checks. Jean thinks to himself that for now he is asking just on a whim. Returning excitedly, the clerk offers him several houses worth considering. Jean raised his eyebrows in surprise. He was sure that only those with a silver rank could buy property. The clerk explains that because of his big business, he has guild vouchers. She presents him with a choice, to buy the house he currently lives in or to choose a better one. Jean decides to buy the apartment he is currently renting and says that it suits him perfectly. The clerk said that another guild house will soon be put up for sale. Jean clearly understands. Houses near the outer walls are a tough cage because of monsters. The clerk whispers a rumor. Supposedly, Amadio of the Golden Rank can purchase this for his retinue. Jean's face twisted with irritation at the thought of his new potential neighbors. He decisively tells the clerk, "I will also take that house and renovate it." Having just bought 2 houses, he walks away, thinking about his new projects. He decides to start the renovation with the back door of his new home. Suddenly Let's appears, waves to Jean friendly and asks. Jean explains that this time he will stay aside, most participants are newcomers. Let's jokingly scold him for not being grateful to the monster hunter. Jean says he knows his neighbor Ash went bear hunting. Then he asks us, let him know if any room nearby becomes available. Jean was surprised when Let's admitted that he himself is moving. Let's explain that his recent promotion in rank finally allows him to buy a house. Jean looks with sincere admiration. He is impressed by Let's success, achieved through hard work. Suddenly Jean had an idea. His eyes opened wide. A spark of inspiration flashed in them. Smiling, he asks if he will be free tomorrow to help with some matter. The next day, Jean asks Let's to keep the doors inside the building open for him. What a shock to find out that both Jean and Ash have houses here. Jean explains his secret of nature, but prefers not to share the spring for potion making. He thinks he wants to help people but do it quietly, staying in the shadows. While working, Jean asks which house he is looking for. Let's imagine his ideal home, 3 floors and downstairs a shop window. Jean turns around and with a curious sparkle in his eyes asks, why does he need a shop window for his new home? Let's shyly explain what it would be like for his wife, and it completely shocks Jean. Coming to his senses, Jean asks if Let's met anyone and feels a slight disappointment. Let's gets confused and insists, buy a house and the wife will find herself. Jin's spark of hope for a love story flared up again, and he impatiently asks to hear all the details. He categorically denies having a partner and declares, work is the most important thing for me. At the table, we praise his culinary genes and inquire about that sourish aftertaste. Jen suddenly shuddered. He forgot that there are no tomatoes in this world. He tries to hide the mistake, scolding Let's for eating unfamiliar food. He fully trusts Jin in the kitchen, and this surprises his host. Jin is flattered by such trust and shyly admits that it makes him a little embarrassed. Let's approach and ask Jin if he thinks the golden ranks will bring them trouble. Jin twirls pasta on his fork, his face becoming serious and thoughtful. He admits that he just wants to stay away from them and their followers. So let's take it correctly, Jin just wants to avoid ending up in their party. He warns if he finds out that Jean sees spirits, it will be a real problem. The size of the gene corresponded to Let's assessment of the complex situation. The dark, empty panel makes the weight of Let's serious words even more palpable. Shock pierced Jean. He could not comprehend how Let's could possibly have known his secret. We watch calmly, with a knowing expression waiting for the gene's reaction. The revelation hung in the air. The chapter ended. Let's as his gaze remains impassive, while Jean's inner panic grows increasingly. With a self-satisfied smirk, we ask if Jean understands what he is talking about. He shows his hint. Chris never calls Jean by his real name. Jean recalled Chris's vivid nicknames and suddenly realized that Let's was right. Let's suggest that Jean simply ask Chris to use his real name and sincerely praise his character. Jean silently accepts the advice, still trying to grasp the stunning revelation. The young man thoughtfully pondered the traveler Chris, acknowledging that he is a good person and liked by everyone. He, however, admits Chris's noisy, wild nature sometimes overwhelms him a bit. Chris appears with a theatrical gesture, joyfully exclaiming the nickname, "Oh, Evening Twilight." Jean thoughtfully considers how Chris relies on intuition, unaware of its true spiritual source. Let's think among ourselves. Should we reveal Chris's secretan, thereby expose that he sees spirits? Jean aloud asks himself, can this be called a secret if Chris himself suspects nothing? Suddenly, Fane falls into dramatic panic and asks what he should do in this situation. Jean thinks that Let's is having too much fun, and Let's teases him as if he is in trouble. With a triumphant smile, Let's reveal that he had always suspected something special about Chris. Jean stands in shock and exclaims that the whole Let's show is just a clever bluff. With a dark but impressed smile, Jean admits that they completely outsmarted him. Let's place a supportive hand on Jean's shoulder and promise to watch over his golden ranks. When Let's walk away sounded, Jean was impressed by the maturity and life experience of his friend. Blurred abstract image like a hint, time flows, focus shifts. Jean carefully tends his crops, and at the same time, whispers names to the spirits that emerged on the expedition squad's path. He recalls how together with Ash he created revolutionary eye medicine, and it caused a sensation in the guild. Sitting by the fire, Jin thoughtfully looks into the flames and contemplates the huge amount of work still ahead. He tells his dog-like companion Rish that it is time to behave like a person full of love. A mysterious figure in a cloak disappeared into the forest with a quiet, swift rustle. Jen in a cloak notices that other peoples have already started hunting expeditions in the forest. He reveals his trick, hiding under a mask to gather news about where he was seen. Peeking from behind a bush, he gasped he noticed something alarming. He found his targets 3 adventurers surrounded by threatening wolves. He recognized these adventurers, they are from the Empire, and noticed horned monsters nearby. Owls and bats swooped down from the sky, joining the frenzied crowd of monsters. A huge roaring bear stood up on its hind legs, and the threats became even greater. Jin was petrified with horror. He realized that the forest was teeming with monsters and hunters were becoming prey. He recalls how Kina from the guild said that recently there had been almost no reconnaissance squads. One of the adventurers screamed when the shadow beast lunged at him. Without hesitation, Jin rushed forward, his hands glowing with charged magical energy. With a determined look, Jin releases her power amid splashes of dark blood. The 3 travelers froze in stunned silence, watching the sudden and brutal intervention. Once threatening monsters now lie fallen on the ground, crosses in their eyes. The lead adventurer sharply turned to the figure in the cloak and demanded, "Who are you?" The figure in the cloak extends a hand, and a healing spell envelops the wounded traveler. The traveler looks down, not believing his eyes, and exclaims, "I am completely healed." The mysterious figure warns them, "Do not take any more risks in this forest." The recovering man calls the leader to wait, completely confused by what happened. His comrades rush to him, sighing with relief that he is safe, while he blames himself through tears for his weakness. Watching from afar, the guy in the cloak is irritated by this situation and decides to leave. He thoughtfully reflects on how he earned a reputation as a person who appears in this forest. A sharp, angular graphic transition seems to signal his plan is changing. He decides to spread false news. Through spirits, he whispers to adventurers that he is heading northwest. The montage shows him disguising himself as a luff and working on his potions. 2 months later at night in the town, Jean anxiously calls his butler. In the tavern, Jean eagerly asks his butler, "Please cut my hair." The butler categorically refused. Jean froze in shock and exclaimed that he was refused. Embarrassed, Let's asks if Jean needs money, surprised by the sudden request. Jean says he just thought to ask for help from a skilled butler. He sincerely says that he cannot stand haircuts in the local baths. Ash picked up cutting Jin's light hair would be a great pity. Jin wonders, doesn't this water have something special since his hair shines so much? We suggest growing it longer, but Jin immediately says no, saying washing it is too much trouble. He comes up with a mischievous idea and thinks about just shaving his head instead. Let's panics offered to cut Jin's hair himself, just to stop that radical step. Jin is stunned and thinks, is he giving himself away with his psychic abilities, or is he just too predictable? The butler advises the Jeans to simply hire a servant, and the very thought of this seems absurd to one Jean. The tavern doorbell rang. More people have arrived. Dean and Chris enter, cheerfully shouting that the whole company is here. Let's warmly welcome them and sincerely congratulate them on completing their request. Jin thought to himself, newcomers as always are wildly noisy. Let's ask Dean how the golden adventurer Amadeo and his squad are doing. Dean confirms Amadeo is strong and gets along wonderfully with his 2 partners. Chris dramatically admits that he envies their spirit weapon and dreams that someday he will be loved like that too. Jean thinks that Chris's words sound a bit suggestive and inappropriate. An archer vividly shows that a spirit weapon is useless until it loves the one who holds it. Jean thoughtfully wondered, is that really how spirit weapons work? When he returns home, he decides to give his blade special care. Dean does not trust the hero's followers. He is convinced that they act out of blind faith. Jean mentally rejoices, good thing I didn't get involved with them. Chris reveals, this time there are 4 heroes, and the Empire allows them to do whatever they want. Jean froze in shock and exclaimed that there are only 4 of them. A flash of memories suddenly revealed to him his sister and her friend, those he considered the only heroes. He recalls that meeting with the gods and suddenly realizes that he never had the chance to ask questions. In the conversation, it is emphasized, true heroes only grow stronger with years. The traveler notices that the further west, the rarer the spirits appear. Ash, engulfed in rage, demands to know who is responsible for restraining the heroes. Dean says that the heroes' actions significantly increase the likelihood of a monster invasion. Chris dramatically complains that monsters suddenly appeared from everywhere. Let's try to change the subject by subtly hinting to them not to touch such serious topics. Suddenly he challenges the embarrassed Jin, a drinking duel face to face. Let's and Chris strictly set the terms of the bet concerning secrets and brothels. Jin was confused by the strange names of the establishments they mention. It dawns on him they are talking about elite brothels where entry is only by recommendation. Ash agrees to the bet, ignoring its dubious nature. Ash notices the creepy expression on the butler's face as soon as brothels are mentioned. But Ash is concerned about the brothel's reputation and openly says this is not a high-class establishment. The butler is left speechless when he realizes that Ash is worried about something completely different. The night ended with us passing out drunk, caught in the crossfire of this contest. The butler notices Jean has an impressive tolerance to alcohol. Jean smiles and admits that the magic of his heel only leaves him slightly tipsy. The butler entrusts Jin to take care of Ash while he cleans up himself. Jin agrees, noticing a barely noticeable change in Ash's behavior. Ash blushes and looks confused. It is clear that the alcohol is making itself known. Jin notices that Ash also seems to be tipsy. The butler smiled as if confirming that a drunk Ash is truly a rare sight. Ash confidently insists that he can walk on his own without any problems. Jin anxiously calls Ash as he walks unsteadily. He rushed forward and shouted to Ash that he was about to hit the wall. Ash, leaning against him, mumbles that everything is fine, but Jin insists he is completely drunk. A gentle hand reaches out and a voice softly asks, "Calm down." Jin tells the drunk Ash to calm down, and he softly murmurs in agreement. He smiles, thinking he must intervene before Ash crashes into the wall. Jin wrapped his arm around Ash and supports him, leading him down a quiet street under the moonlight. Boots echo on the cobblestones and suddenly Ash freezes. Jin turns with concern and asks his companion if something is wrong. Looking up with a blush on his cheeks, Ash quietly whispers Jin's name. Completely stunned by the intimate moment, Jin let out a questioning sound. Their boots still on the cobblestones, and a question hung in the air: what is wrong? Behind Jin, still holding him, calls Ash. A close-up shows Ash's confused, drunken face while Jin watches. Ash leans closer and quietly whispers Jin's name again to start the chapter. Chibai Jin is amusingly puzzled by Ash's quiet whisper of agreement. Under the starry sky, Ash drunkenly mumbles about a brothel, which confuses Jin. Ash nods as if his nonsensical words made perfect sense, which irritates Jin. Drunken Ash suddenly starts a conversation about hair. This confuses Jin even more. Jin honestly says he doesn't understand the conversation, and Ash continues to agree. A close-up of Jin's eye shows embarrassment over his companion's state. He notices how alcohol has softened Ash's facial features. Ash's confused look slightly worries him. Jin quietly whispers Ash's name, eyes fixed on his companion. Suddenly another man appeared and sternly warned, "Getting drunk in public is dangerous." Jin looks at Ash, pondering the stranger's wise advice. Ash quietly murmured in agreement under the gloomy, star-studded night sky. The next morning, Jin energetically kneads a ball of dough in the kitchen. He worries whether everyone is okay after yesterday's drinking spree. Having made sure that everyone else is fine, he decides to prepare something to ease Ash's hangover. He approaches the door and knocks decisively. The door opens and Ash appears looking terrible. Jin asks how he feels. Another man offers bread and sausages, but Ash complains of stomach pain. Jin suggests using the kitchen to prepare something more suitable. Instead, he serves a warm drink made from ginger and citrus syrup. Ash took a sip and squinted in surprise at the unexpected spicy sweet taste. Jin gently advises him to rest and drink more water. Finally feeling better, Ash sincerely thanks Jin and apologizes for making him worry. Jin was already about to leave when suddenly Ash called him by name. Ash gently reminds him of the promise to visit the Bow of Spirits together. Jin agrees, recalling their first meeting, and confirms that he has time. The elderly butler smiles and promises to inform them when it's time to go. The next day, the town wakes up under a bright sky. Jin and Ash walk side by side, and Ash sincerely says he feels much better. Jin watches as they walk through the city streets. A small fluffy bird named Azu happily perched on Ash's head. Jin noticed, although Azu shone with joy, Ash as always frowned. A young girl with a sparkle in her eyes asks if they are visiting the Kanema Spirit Arch for the first time. She confirms this is exactly the place where they came in the matter of Dean's sister's spirit. Their boots step on the path as they announce their arrival. Before them stood the Spirit Arch, a beautiful stone building. Ash notes with a slight smile, such a noticeable building is a common thing in big cities. Inside, Ash becomes a guide and enthusiastically shows the workshops. He gestures for Jin to look deeper inside, towards the courtyard. Jin's eyes widened in complete amazement when he saw what stood before him. Several trees and a stone wall gently frame this beautiful scene. He asks if that branch near the fountain is the very bow after which this place was named. Standing by the shining fountain, Ash explains that it is a gift from the royal bow. Jin recalls that he once preferred studying world history rather than bow legends. He wonders whether this weaker bow is just an imitation or a fake. Ash silently watches as Jin ponders, while the bird sits on his head. Ash explains that the royal bow is a sacred tree for the spirits. Jin panics inside, thinking that Ash noticed his ignorance on the subject. And then it dawns on him he already admitted to Ash that he knows nothing. The story reveals what the power of the bows is and what oaths bind them. The map shows 3 nations that inherited the royal bow. Jin realizes that his sister was sent to one of those countries. Ash enthusiastically explains that magical stones create a cozy field for the spirits. Jin thinks that making offerings is a complete hassle. He watches as a woman goes to the fountain and can't get rid of the thought, does she work here? The woman pulls a glowing magical stone from her basket. She gently lowers the stone into the fountain's basin. Jin watches as the stones are placed into the sparkling water. He wonders how long the rare and precious stones will be able to sustain the spirits. He anxiously asks, will it be possible to maintain the field without the stones? Ash explains that without them the magic would crumble. While he speaks, a tiny winged spirit like a fairy suddenly appears next to Jin. The fairy flies to the fountain and loudly announces that the spirits are approaching. Jin looks and realizes the spirits are turning the water into holy water. Ash enthusiastically explains the night ritual of lighting the bonfire, which brings a better harvest. He suggests showing the city to Jin once more, and Jin agrees. Jin is confused, his mind instantly jumped to a different conclusion. He cannot believe himself, did he just agree to a night date with Ash? The bird Azu suddenly flew off Ash's head. It suddenly dives into the fountain, and a huge splash flies right at the shocked Ash. Jin and Ash watch in surprise as the tiny spirit looks at the splash. The last thought flashed, how beautiful Ash is when not frowning. The gaze shifts outward. Before us is a majestic house. Rudial Jin throws firewood into the bonfire together with his companion Rish. He pulls out a perfectly baked sweet potato from the heat. Rudial proudly looks at his lush fields, satisfied with their growth. He thinks about plant crossbreeding but doubts his own skill. He beams with joy. He saw a tiny fairy tending to the pea plants. He also notices the spirits of cabbage and Italian parsley. His thoughts naturally turn to his companion Rish. He notices Rish near the onions and calls out anxiously. The woman's eyes widened with anxiety. Suddenly she appears and warns, Rish is not a dog, he cannot eat onions. Rudial admits that her sudden appearance scared him quite a bit. He keeps wondering, does Rich do this out of tenderness for his former leader? The woman thought that Rudial has a lot to puzzle over because of that leader. Rudial, inspired by these cute vegetables, suddenly gets an idea. The old woman, her friend, and the boy visited the garden. Filled with gratitude, Jean watches as the boy Ish diligently waters the fields. Then an elderly woman in a hood named Pal walks through the garden quietly and gracefully. As she moves, magic makes plants sprout around her quietly and with gentle pop sounds. Large, perfect strawberries suddenly appear on the vines where the friend just passed. Jin freezes with admiration, looks at the scene, and thinks that his life has truly turned into fantasy. His gaze fell on Rudial, who stood next to Rish, and he mockingly called her the servant of that creature. Suddenly, a spark of inspiration exploded in Jin. A new idea was born in his head. He turns to the spirits and suggests to them maybe to try vegetables from his garden. Confident that they will be able to taste it, he decides, trying won't hurt. He carefully serves a nicely prepared salad, topped with one majestic strawberry. The group gathered around the table, and Jean kindly encourages them to try a small portion first. Pal raises a fork with a piece to her lips, a gentle curiosity on her face. Rudial eats with a calm expression, closing her eyes and enjoying the taste. Leaning forward, Jin waits eagerly and anxiously for their final verdict on his dish. Ish and Pal praise the salad in unison, saying it is sweet, sour, and fresh. Overflowing with happiness, Jin suddenly realized that now he could prepare many different vegetable dishes for them. A simple remark from Rudial about the sweetness makes him wonder if she really likes the taste of onion. A large multi-story residential building emerges before the eyes, a sign that the action is changing. From inside, Jean responds to the knock on the door and loudly says, "I'm coming." He opens the door with a radiant smile and warmly invites the guests inside. And then Ash and the butler appear. They have come to the housewarming. In the modestly furnished room, Jean proudly says that he did everything possible for this event. Let's jokingly complain that Jean made him work like a slave in 2 houses. The butler and Ash sincerely thank Let's for all that hard work. The butler silently contemplates his decision to take on the estate to protect Ash. A grim memory surfaces: their dangerous escape from Ash's vengeful brother, the Duke. He instantly pushes away the dark thoughts with a simple internal no. Let's explain he got a rent discount thanks to a payment from Jean. Jean was inwardly impressed by how the butler instantly and businesslike decided to rent the accommodation to Let's show how he sighed with relief when he found a cheaper rent on the outskirts of the city. He sincerely shares the hope that someday he will buy a house where he will spend the rest of his life. Jean asks with a smile if buying a house means we will now start looking for a wife. Embarrassed, he scratches the back of his head and insists that he is not at that stage yet. Ash misunderstood the conversation and decided that first we need to buy a house in order to find a wife. The tour of the new house began. Jean enthusiastically explains the plan of the first floor. Let's show his amazed surprise at the modern conveniences: a bath and a toilet separated by a wall. Jean is boiling inside with anger over the primitive and unhygienic hygiene standards of this world. His face became serious. He sternly reminded us about the rental conditions. He categorically says that we must bathe every day and clean the bath twice a year. Let's express his sincere admiration for Jean. He himself made all the final touches. Secretly, Jean himself knows. He used storage magic and called upon spirits to help make it. Unable to tell the truth, he brushed off the compliment, saying, "I am just in shape." He leads the group upstairs and loudly says that there are 3 rooms on the 2nd floor. Let's froze in shock, seeing a real bed with a thick mattress that looked extremely comfortable. He carefully sits on the edge and tries to feel what this unfamiliar object gives. Flopping on his back, he exclaims excitedly how completely different and wonderful it is, not at all like straw. Jean explained his choice. He wanted to avoid insects and advised to air the mattress occasionally. Somewhere else, Ash and the butler examine a strange panel on the wall, puzzling over what it is. Jean gently corrects Ash, who is trying to push the door, explaining that they are sliding. With a light clatter, Ash slid the door, it opened, and surprise appeared on his face. He admires the novelty excitedly and shows. It opens from both sides and connects the rooms. Jen silently thinks that such doors are not respected here, they are too easy to remove. Ash continues sliding the doors back and forth, completely enchanted by the mechanism. When the inspection of the upper floors ended, Jean explains how this building is arranged. He confirms to the grateful person that the rooms have locks for storing weapons, as requested. Letsis's face lit up with joy, and he instantly thought about the dishes promised by Jean. The butler and Ash feel his anticipation, both eagerly await this wonderful meal. Standing between two senior comrades, Jean feels a bit small but satisfied. A soft smile blooms on his face as he thinks about how their lively energy makes him happy. He takes the first bite of the housewarming festive treat and immediately exclaims how delicious it is. Jean wonders how exciting it is to see their reactions to his increasingly complex dishes. He explains that it is a morel gratin mushrooms that are technically poisonous. An illustration appears before the eyes, clearly showing the dangerous false morel mushroom. The second illustration shows the edible yellow morel for comparison. He thoughtfully recalls his culinary passion, cooking dangerous dishes like fugu fish in his old world. The group does not tire of praising the gratin. Its crispy crust and creamy center evoke genuine admiration. Jen bathes in their compliments and silently urges them not to stop praising. When Let's asks for a drink, Jin jokingly cancels his previous rush to leave. With flair, Jin announces that he has prepared a special dessert for them. He presents a luxurious piece of chiffon cake, topped with a generous spoonful of maple cream. The butler and Ash take a bite, both impressed by the fluffy and tender texture of the cake. Let's notices with surprise that in their world sweets are almost always hard or preserved. Jin recalls how last time they were equally amazed by his casella pancakes. He thinks that sweets here are a rare, heavy luxury, like a dense butter cake. Let's and Ash explain that such treats are usually reserved for truly special holidays. Ash notes that in Kainmi recently there has been an invasion of maple delicacies. He explains that maple syrup is a signature delicacy from the capital. Jean lifts a large bottle with a cork maple syrup, the label adorned with an emblem in the shape of a leaf. He smiles and offers his delighted guests a little more of the sweet syrup. Ash once wondered, why don't they just plant maples here nearby? Jean notices that Let's and the butler seem to prefer spicy or milder flavors. The butler politely raised his hand and declined the offer to add more syrup. Ash, however, impatiently asks for another serving, which quietly pleases Jean. The cozy home scene is instantly replaced by a dark, ominous forest. The girl shouted boldly, "Stop, don't you dare touch my brother." She stood protectively in front of the little boy and looked at the two aggressive men. Peeking from behind a tree, Jean had a gloomy and serious face. He sighed and realized he was in real trouble. He recognizes the children, they are from the Dinozo family, and wonders what is going on here. Bandits threaten to maim the children's father if they refuse to cooperate. One of the men reaches out his hand, clearly wanting to grab the frightened girl. The girl pulls back and closes her eyes in fear of the approaching touch. With a sudden explosion of cruelty, both bandits were thrown into the air. They fell unconscious. Jean emerges from hiding, his face full of anxiety. He asks if they are okay. Overwhelmed with relief, the children shout his name and rush into his warm embrace. He holds them close and gently asks them to tell what is happening here. Seal, through tears, tells him that a group of people came and took their father. She recalls how their mother shouted to run, but they were noticed and caught. Jean gently soothes her, promising that they will find her father, but insists that she remain quiet. Two of the children agree, their faces now filled with fragile but renewed determination. Young Jean thoughtfully and gently smiles, looking into the distance. Watching as the sister defends the younger brother, he feels a split. This dynamic is familiar to him. Nearby, kidnappers holding the parents hostage demand to know where the children are. Hiding, Jin with a grim expression carefully assesses the threatening situation. Dinozo's father was pressed to the ground, and his wife was threatened. Jean realizes that protecting all the children hiding at once will be incredibly difficult. A scarred man mocks the helpless father, calling him the rusty king of wolves. The name Bomber confused Jin, and recognition flashed in his eyes for a moment. He remembers how a friend passionately spoke about the legendary traveler Bomber. The daughter screamed "Dad," but instantly fell silent from fear. In the whirl of movement, a foot hit the ground with a dull thud. A sharp striking sound and the counterattack begins. Jin sprang into action and delivered a powerful blow to one of the thugs. Other captors froze in shock and demand to know what he is doing. For a moment, a barely noticeable smile appears on the mother's lips, as if she knows everything. Mother Shiva calmly and composedly said Amai amid the chaos. Incredibly quickly, she intercepts the leader's hand and stops his attack. She smoothly disarms the man, wrenching the sword from his hands. Confidently holding the blade, she throws the enemy a decisive smile. Shiva delivers a powerful sweeping strike. Her incredible skill shines fully. Her strength stuns the audience. People freeze, confused and speechless with admiration.